chaos getting into Ipswich today. I will just remind members that there is an app on Suffolk County Council's Highways website where you can go on and tell them about the road situations and your comments. So I suggest you all do that. It might help. Anyway, we're still expecting one or two people to arrive who are down on our list of wishing to speak or what have you. So they've got time to still get here. But we'll make a start. The first item, get you to do the health and safety.
Thank you, Chair. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room down the corridor. Cold water is available outside in the breakout area, and if the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch, and please remain there until you are told it is safe to return. Also, please ask that you switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent, as there is a donation to the Chairman's charity if not.
Oh, that's a new little bit added on. I forgot mine today, so I can't turn it off. Right, the council, members of the public and press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. Babergh District Council are voice recording this meeting. Any member of the public who attends a meeting and objects to being filmed should have advised the committee clerk. As far as I'm aware, no one has indicated that they will be filming or that they do not want to be filmed. Is that still the case? Okay, thank you. In accordance with the Council's Planning Charter, members of the public are not permitted to communicate, whether verbally or in writing, with members of the committee during the course of the meeting, including any adjournments. If a member of the committee is approached by a member of the public, then they must draw it immediately to my attention and also the attention of the legal advisor present.
Good morning.
Thank you, Ian. If a member of the public attempts to communicate with a member of the committee, then they may be asked to leave the meeting. Finally, can members and officers and also public speakers ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn it off when you've finished, and try and keep as close as possible to it so that we can all hear you. Do not hold papers in front of it because that blocks it as well. Thank you. Substitutes and apologies. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, Councillor Davis for Lee Parker.
Thank you very much.
Another one.
Yep, okay.
Thank you, Chair. We have one other apology this morning of Councillor Norman.
Thank you. And with no substitute. No. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Councillor Busby.
That was a good guess. Yes, I declare an interest in 6B as a Cabinet Member for Assets and Investments, which includes Boreham Gate and Hamilton Road. I do have views on what should be happening there, and it may or may not coincide with what's going on here. So I'll actually step out during this.
Thank you. We'll note that and you'll leave the meeting at that point and then return for the other one. Thank you. No other declarations of interest? No. Item 4, to confirm the minutes held on the 9th of October. You've all seen the copies of this. Can I sign them as a true record? And so Councillor Ayres, seconded by Councillor Busby. All those in favour? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Right. Do we have any petitions?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Site inspections. You call on any site inspections? No?
Yeah, we have one.
Oh, you're called to call it. Thank you. Yeah,
sorry,
yeah. Would you like to do that now then, please?
A site visit has been requested by Councillor Parker. Unfortunately, he's not here today. He has sent an email to explain his reasons why he feels a site visit is necessary. He has said that given the committee has new members, I think it's important that they have the opportunity to visit the site in order to gain visual context of it in relation to the existing street scene. In particular, he would be keen for members to view the proposed site, the location in context to existing dwellings and position within the village, and the proposed access. The proposal has generated significant interest locally, and I think it pertinent and appropriate that members should view the application site for themselves prior to the application coming before committee.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick one. Where are we talking about?
Okay, the site it is in Assington. It sits behind the farm shop. It's an outline planning permission for 19 dwellings with access to be considered. This is the site location. It's currently used as a caravan site. The site is located within a special landscape area, and to the east of the site is the flood zone, which is shown on the map. The main street of Assington is to the west of the site, and you can see the access point marked out in that orange colour there. The site is in pink. As Councillor Parker has said, there has been several applications around the site. We have 3 applications in total, which has generated 23 dwellings. All 3 have actually been granted. To the north of the site, which is just at the top there where it says existing site plan, 8 houses have been given permission. Then to the south of the site, another 8, and then in the middle section there is, oh, there we go, sorry. So 8 up the top here, 8 down the bottom here, and 7 here. This is the site area to be considered. This is just a visual of what it may look like with the 19 dwellings on the site. And that is it.
Thank you. Well, members, you've seen the photographs. Do you think that's sufficient, or do you wish to go on a site inspection?
We haven't seen any photographs. Are there any photographs?
Well, just
We've seen
the
the
plans. Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't seen any photographs, which might
Well,
give
you've
us an
seen the
indication
plans that
whether
are
we
in
need
front
to
of
see it
you.
on the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah. I think that perhaps we should go along and see this. Somebody second it? Yep. Councillor Busby. Any other comments? No? All those in favour of site inspection, please show. Anyone against? 1. Okay, thank you. That's carried. We'll have a site inspection. That'll be next Wednesday.
Can I suggest that it's a bit later?
A bit later.
A bit later, closer to the committee date. We don't actually have a committee date set yet because of the election.
Right. Normally we don't bring them quite as early, but yeah, because of the election. So that's going to be December then, isn't it, really? So we'll inform you when the date is sorted, okay? It certainly won't be next Wednesday. Thank you. Members, is there any site inspections that you wish to call? Councillor Busby?
Well, Chair, I didn't have mentioned that there's a couple in Copdock that I'd like the Planning Committee to go and have a look at, but they're not ready yet, so I guess that will be later in the year as well.
Right, well, I think they can note it and then hopefully bring it forward.
One of them is the alterations to the Cameo Hotel, or the Copdock, or Best Western, whatever it's called these days, which is quite a significant development and quite controversial in the area. And the other one is the other side of the road. It's an ancient, well, it's an old barn. It's probably one of the oldest buildings in the area, and how that's going to be converted and brought into use with the existing house.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, officers note that, and then that can come back to us in due course. Councillor Jemison?
Yeah, I'd like to ask for a site visit for a proposed development in Kersey. I believe the previous committee has been out to look at this on an earlier occasion, but obviously there's a change of committee now. It's quite controversial. It's the development situated behind Grade 2 star listed buildings and next to a Grade 2 star pub, and it's quite a lot of correspondence in the village.
Do you know when this is likely to come to us?
I'm not sure, no.
Can I suggest that you have a word with the officers afterwards, find out when it's coming. If it's imminent, then yes, we can deal with it quickly. And okay. If it's coming in the new year or later, then we can make sure that we pick it up nearer the time.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have a reference number for it?
Not at hand, no.
No. Right, we'll check it out. Okay, so bear with us. Thank you. Members, no other site inspections recorded, so we'll move on to item number 6. And you want to do that one first? Okay. We're going to... Hang on a minute. I need to... What page is it on? We're going to take item C, 6C, which is on page 51, and that's 40 George Street, Hadleigh, first. The reason we're bringing it forward, we've got all the people present that have said they were going to be here, so we're going to deal with that one first. So if anyone else is stuck in traffic, they've got the opportunity to get here for the others too. Right, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members and public. So this application relates to the erection of one dwelling, a new vehicular access in Hadleigh, 40 George Street. So the key issues here with this application is the potential harm to the listed building and what public benefits outweigh this harm, if any at all. To what extent the proposed development actually sits harmoniously within the landscape and the existing townscape, particularly in regards to the conservation area. And to what extent the Hadleigh swimming pool, which is adjacent to the site, is likely to cause potential residential amenity issues to any future occupiers, as well as the design, obviously, of the proposed dwelling. So here you can see the site. You've got 40 and 42 George Street to the north. Hadleigh Leisure Centre obviously is to the south, along with a car park and another car park further east. You've got sort of open space along to the west, which also runs behind the leisure centre. And as you can see here, there's several listed buildings, both grade 2 and 2 star, within the vicinity, and it's right in the heart of obviously the conservation area. So this puts it into obviously its aerial view. You can see the greenery and the landscape and parkland, which predominantly obviously surrounds one, the listed building, but also the swimming pool. So there was a previous application last year, which was very similar to this one. However, it was for the erection of a 1.5-storey dwelling. It was refused. It was an officer delegated decision, and it was refused based on the harm caused to the heritage asset to the north, residential amenity for future occupiers, and it was considered to be backland development. So this is the previous refusal block plan, so you can see roughly where it's going. To sort of the northeast is a garage, and to the very north of the site is obviously 40 George Street. This is basically an overlay, so this is a current proposal situated, and then on top the yellow demonstrates the previous refused application. So here you can see that although they're proposing single storey, the footprint has increased ever so slightly. These are the proposed elevations. So you've got single storey bungalow, obviously brickwork and weatherboarding. So those, and this is the existing floor plan. So it's quite small, 2-bed bungalow. This was a previous one that was refused, so this is the 1.5 storey, and the dotted line just shows the change in height. So this is the main difference between the previous refusal, is the fact that obviously they've reduced the height fairly significantly. This is then 40 and 42 George Street. It was listed in 1950. It's obviously a 17th century 2-storey timber framed and plastered building with a thatched roof. It's quite prominent in the area. It's quite prominent in the street scene along George Street, particularly as you've got the open space to the south of it. It's also obviously in the conservation area. So this image is from the Hadleigh swimming pool. So you can see the hedgerow which borders the existing dwelling, and the dotted line demonstrates approximately where the roof line would be for this proposed dwelling. So from the leisure centre and the wider green park area, it would be quite dominant in comparison to the listed building, and in fact from this point of view it would pretty much end up blocking your view and appreciation of the listed building. Our heritage team have said that it causes a low to moderate level of less than substantial harm, both to obviously the listed building and the conservation area. So the red arrow demarks where the entrance would be, and as you can see at the moment, obviously the curtilage is mature hedgerow, trees, and there's some green open space and a footpath to the front of it. So in terms of harm, the MPPF says that obviously any harm to a listed building must be considered and great weight attributed to it unless there are obviously public benefits that outweigh that harm. So just an explanation. So if there's no harm to either the listed building itself or obviously the setting, then that's, any application is acceptable. Less than substantial harm, you can have negligible, you can have low, moderate, high, and then obviously you've got substantial harm, which is MPPF paragraph 195. This proposal is considered to cause between low and moderate level of less than substantial harm, and the public benefits are one dwelling. Now, Babergh can at present demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. I appreciate there is a need for potentially single-storey bungalows within Hadleigh. However, the one dwelling is not considered to outweigh the harm caused to not only the listed buildings in its immediate setting, but also the wider setting as well as the conservation area. And as such, the application should therefore be refused in line with the paragraphs 193 to 196 of the MPPF. Here's a historic map where you can see, this is obviously before the leisure centre was built, you can see that to the north of George Street, all the properties are quite dense, they're all fronting the highway, and they're quite tight, whereas George Street is basically in the middle of the open area. And the swimming pool is obviously impinged on that setting of George Street slightly. However, it's still set far back and it's not considered to be within its immediate setting, whereas this proposed dwelling would obviously be in the garden curtilage and therefore the immediate setting of the Grade 2 listed building. So there is obviously an existing bungalow. The white building you can see to the right of that is 4042 George Street. So there has been some development in close proximity, However, that was it's been there for quite a while, and because of its orientation and the fact that it does sit on its own plot further to the right, it's not considered to have as much of an impact as this proposal. In terms of residential amenity, there's concern that obviously it's buyer beware, that future occupiers will be potentially disturbed by members of the public and people visiting the swimming pool. Now, the swimming pool has recently had permission, which I believe is now underway, for an extension, so could potentially have more visitors. There's a car park directly to the south of the site and one slightly further away to the east, but there's a large amount of obviously traffic movement. As you can see, the cars, go to the car park either way, and so on, for either drop off for potentially swimming classes or obviously to actually attend the leisure centre themselves. And here is where obviously all the noise would technically come from. In terms of the backland development, which is another reason for refusal, you can see that there's an outbuilding within the existing bungalow curtilage, but within 40 and 42 George Street, there are no outbuildings, there are no other buildings within gardens, and it's read as sort of almost one whole garden, as well as a wider park area to the north and south. There's a lot of greenery, not that many roof forms, with the exception obviously of Hadleigh swimming pool. So that's just putting it into a wider context for you in terms of the buildings and the number of buildings within that area. And this one, this just shows obviously the townscape and the greenery, to emphasise that if you put another dwelling obviously in this location, you're significantly altering the existing character of the area, which is predominantly open space, and then the setting into the listed building. So for reasons explained, that particularly the low to moderate level of harm, this application should be refused because there's not enough benefit from one housing to outweigh that harm. There's also concern in terms of residential amenity for future occupiers, although obviously it is buyer beware. If you're going to potentially buy the house, you would be aware of it.
Thank you, Catherine. And turn the lights back up. Thank you. Right. Is that a point of order? Yep.
Apologies, Chair, but just looking at this, I think it's prudent that I mention, and I'm sure the solicitor can help me, that I am the Cabinet Member for Communities, which part of the Hadleigh Leisure Centre is part of that, and obviously the ongoing works, I've had a part to play in that. I know it'll have no adverse effect whatsoever, but I thought it was prudent to mention it.
Very well. You would like to comment?
Chairman, I'm quite happy that that's not an interest that should disqualify Councillor Davis. He's wise to mention it, but that's all that's necessary.
Thank you. We'll note that. Right. This is Town Council. Gavin Talbot, would like to come forward, sir? You have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. Perhaps should remain seated or standing at the front there afterwards, and I'll see if there's any questions from members to you. Thank you.
Hello, thanks for having me. We've come along to this meeting having discussed it at our town council meeting, and which is where we had no issue with approving it. The reason we've sort of come along was because the recommendation for refusal on it, and it's specifically around the heritage bit that is our focus. I understand there may be other issues and that you may want to discuss, but what I'm going to say is purely focused on the heritage, because we think that there's a kind of inconsistency in the way that has been approached to some degree compared to other development in that area. When we were discussing it at the town council meeting, heritage is obviously a key consideration we had with it being in a conservation area, and there's a number of us who have actually over the years had a kind of keen interest in that particular area with the various things that have been going on. So we have good knowledge of the area. We also were quite keen to see what the Hadleigh Society sort of view of it was, as they're very knowledgeable on the local heritage of the area. We note that they didn't have any real objections to it, just suggesting there should be 3 conditions that are placed on the application if it's approved. And that they seem to feel happy that from the previous refusal that some of the key issues for refusal had actually been dealt with. I think what was our concern was the heritage team view on it, because it feels like it is inconsistent with some other development in that area, in particular the swimming pool and East House, where those developments have actually been given a rating of low harm, whereas this is actually contrary to what I think I just heard said, where it's given low to moderate. In the report, at least, it actually says that it's got a medium level of less than substantial harm, which seems inconsistent with the previous applications for the swimming pool and East House. And bear with me a sec. And just kind of to suggest that a single floor bungalow, which we're, from the picture, we're only really going to see a bit of roof, it appears, would have a big impact on the heritage of the area when you've got a massive swimming pool there, for example, which clearly has a public benefit, but you know, we're struggling to see how that makes a medium level of harm when other stuff in the area, which is far bigger, has a low level of harm. And we kind of felt that the report seems to suggest it's going to be a lot more visible than it actually appears to be. It certainly doesn't look to be visible from the road
Mr.
side.
Talbot, I'm sorry, but your time is now up. So we just remain seated there. I'll see if there's any questions to you. Members, before I go any further, we do have the Heritage Officer present, Dr. Duck, and he will speak at some point during this, but at the moment he's taking notes so he can comment later. Members, any questions have you got? Yes, Councillor Davis.
Yeah, you make a very good point about the heritage report, and in the report it does indeed say medium, but it also says that the MPPF has to weigh against the level of harm for the benefit. What benefit do you think this development would bring to Hadleigh?
Okay, I mean, clearly it's obviously different with our swimming pool, obviously that has a public benefit. I think the key benefit here is, though, that Hadleigh does need houses that are of a one-level house for like older people to be able to downsize into, which I think is what the applicant's actually essentially looking at do here. And you know, we've got another development there, but there's just not enough of those sort of houses. So I think there is a public benefit, and obviously you can't grade it in the same way as a swimming pool, because that has a benefit to a lot of people and that, but it is a type of housing that is needed in the area.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Busby?
Talk about the harm, you compare it to the swimming pool, but don't you think that a modern building in the garden of a 17th century listed building it's a bit different? It's like comparing apples and pears.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You are talking about different things. I think it was really just to point out that when you can, it's just that inconsistency. It doesn't look like that house, bearing in mind, you know, what you're saying there is very different to a swimming pool, but it does look like it's being treated slightly more harshly in a way than a swimming pool, which yes has a bigger public benefit, but is a massive thing in an open space. And you know, when we look at the East House development as well, was obviously the original plan for that was to actually build onto the park area as well, and again that has a fairly big impact. And now I'm not saying that there's necessarily this should be a low level of impact, and they've got it wrong from that point of view, but maybe that the other ones should be a higher impact potentially. I mean, I'm not the expert there, but just pointing out there does seem to be an inconsistency there in the way that this one's been treated, whether that's that it should be
Thank you.
lower or higher than the matter.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Is there anything you wish to comment from that? No? So who else have we got?
Wait, Chair, they come back to
Yes, I'll come back to Dr. Duck a little bit later. We don't have an objector.
We do have an objector.
Oh, she's in the wrong box, right? We have an objector, Sheila Larwell. We don't have an agent.
Yeah, Ben. I know Ben is.
Oh, right. Another one of Ben's. You have 3 minutes in which to address the committee, and if you remain there at the end, I'll see if there's any questions for you. When you're ready, just press the button and then you can carry on. Thank you.
First of all, I thank you for the opportunity of speaking to you about this application. I live at 42 George Street in the other half of the semi-detached cottage number 40. My garden backs onto the site of the proposed building. Last September, I objected to the previous application on this site, as did many of my neighbours, and the permission was refused. This application is on the same site as before, and the only change is it's a bungalow, not a house. I share the support of the concerns of our Heritage Office about the adverse effects on the character of my property and next door by building in the garden directly behind my back garden wall. I am very concerned about the safety of the children attending the sports centre, since the access to the bungalow is in the service road and the cars turning in and out of the site would be the road safe hazard. Coaches often drop off in this area. The personal circumstances of the application is not relevant, as the bungalow will be a permanent fixture long after it is not needed by Mrs. Quinlan. I wholeheartedly agree with the report of Catherine Howe and her conclusions, and ask that they be backed by the committee and permission is refused as it was before. There is a blood bank vehicle once a year and people come in and give blood, and the lorry is 44 foot long, and this will be right behind the new building, in front of the new building. The access to the new property that Margaret Quinlan is in exactly the same place as it was before. It has not been changed. Mick Fraser has agreed to speak on behalf of Mr. Marino, and I can imagine can you imagine the chaos if it is let through, as vehicles go in and out of behind the access point, such as diggers, cement mixers, lorries, dropping vehicle material off for the build. This is going to be as long as it takes and could be months. New buildings in the historic town is in a back garden, swimming pool, coaches and outside coaches visiting. Mothers and children that use the park walk in the school in Hadleigh, and we cannot be losing bits by bit of parking. The emergency services will not have the place to park if you allow this access road to be used by Mrs. Quinlan. The leisure centre has not got any other loading bay. It's a conservation area and properties are Grade 2 listed. This proposal was turned down last year, so we hope to be let down again.
Thank you. Members, have you got any questions? Just one. You did say that members of the public walk and by would be affected, but that's a private garden, so they can't go in there now. Is that correct?
She'll be coming out that way with her car.
Ah, right.
And any visitors will be using that entrance as well.
Right, thank
and
you.
The only way she can come out of that entrance is
Yep.
coming out backwards.
Yep. No,
She's
you've
got to
made
come
the point
out
clear.
frontwards.
Yeah, thank you. Members, any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Thank you. Is there anything you wish to comment on what you've just heard? No? Right. We don't have a supporter, so we'll now go to the applicant's agent, which is Mr. Van Alven. I think you know the procedure, so I won't repeat it. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Morning, Chair, and morning, members, and thanks again for the opportunity to address you. As you've heard, this application is a resubmission of a previously refused scheme, where the applicant has scaled down the scheme to a single-storey property, and as you saw from the plans, it's a significant reduction in height. That was done in response to the previous concerns of the Heritage Officer. And since that previous application, as you've heard, we now have no objection from the Town Council or from the Hadleigh Society, who had both previously objected. The proposal also has a clean bill of health from the Highway Authority, your consultant ecologist and the Land Contamination Officer. There are a number of letters of support for the proposal, meaning this is an application that now has little in the way of objection and much in the way of support locally. Indeed, we understand that some representatives are here today to speak in support of the proposal, in particular the Town Council. It is clear that one of the main issues is the heritage impacts, and we consider that these impacts have been overplayed and that some context is needed in respect of how the proposal would actually impact. The property was listed in 1950, it was built in 1663. The application site was not brought into the ownership of number 40 until the applicant and her husband bought it in the 1960s. So at the time when the building was listed, this land did not belong to the listed building, and also for the first 300 years of its existence, this land did not belong to the listed building. It was in separate ownership and separate use. Historical mapping shows that at the time the property was listed, as you've seen, the leisure centre did not exist, nor did Stonehouse Road, or the adjacent car park, or the bungalow known as 42A George Street, which sits behind the frontage of 42, or the modern garage building, which I'm disappointed you haven't seen in photographs this morning, which sits behind that bungalow and adjacent to our site. The Heritage Officer identifies the views of number 40 from the road itself as being important to its significance, but does not recognise the new bungalow will not be able to be seen from the road. It will not be possible to see the new dwelling and the listed building in the same context from George Street, and thereby the visual appreciation in respect to the impact on the conservation area and setting the listed building have been overplayed. The proposal would retain the original garden area to the listed property. Identifying the proposal as tandem development is factually incorrect. It is not accessed past the existing house. It has its own road frontage to the leisure centre side. The extension to the leisure centre is vastly more prominent than this modest bungalow would be, and the leisure centre itself has more of an impact on the heritage asset relative to what this proposal would have. In terms of the impact resulting from the leisure centre, the suggested refusal is unfounded. I was commissioned by Babergh District Council to prepare the statement that supported the planning application for the leisure centre extension, which is currently being built. I was advised by the Council to make clear the extension will bring about improvements to the noise attenuation of that building, and that was the message that was given to the public, and it would improve the impact on existing properties. Yet it now appears the leisure centre is being used as a reason to refuse this application due to noise concerns. This is particularly surprising given that no objections have been received from the Council's Environmental Protection team, who were wholly supportive of the works proposed to the leisure centre. The land is already garden, and the new dwelling would be more insulated than the existing buildings, which have little in the way of insulation. Members, the applicant has addressed the Council's previous concerns, such that it is now supported by many who previously objected. It is delivering a bungalow in a highly sustainable location.
Your time is now up. Thank you. I'll see if there's any questions. Could you just, for my benefit, you said the land that you're proposing to put the development on originally in the 60s did not belong or was part of the heritage site which fronts that. Is that correct? Can you just say that again?
That's correct, Chairman. It was bought by the applicant in the 1960s and never previously belonged to the site.
So that was never included when... Thank you. And the garage site, I'll take that up with the officers shortly. Right, members, have you got any questions? Councillor Busby.
It's nice to see Ben again. We've seen more of you now than when you worked here. You talked about that land behind where the proposed development is. What was it before it was taken into as garden?
I think it formed part of the previous parkland. The historic map actually that Catherine showed shows it quite clearly. It's forming part of that wider parcel of land where the leisure centre has now been constructed on. Yeah.
So it's never been designed as, or allocated as a use for housing. It was always a green area.
Absolutely, it's been enclosed. It's enclosed by walling as part of the garden to number 40 now, but that's only a relatively modern development since it was bought, yeah.
Councillor Barrett, followed by Councillor Davis.
Thank you. Hello. You mentioned the garage that you said it's a shame we haven't seen a picture of that or anything detailing that. Can you just confirm who owns this garage, and are you suggesting that that is harmful to the heritage asset?
No, I think the view as you see there to the left of that bungalow is a modern garage, a single-storey garage that's been built in the rear garden of that bungalow.
Mr. Delvin, can you dim the light so we can see it? Sorry to interrupt you. You can carry on.
Actually, that previous image was helpful.
Hold 1 second, and that we'll get that image back up, because the member needs us to see where that was.
There it is. Yeah. The building that's pointed there, the image that you had of the bungalow to the side, that garage is not shown. There's a modern garage that's been built in the garden of that. So you've got number 42A behind number 40 and 42, and behind that is that garage on the corner, which sits adjacent to our sides.
Councillor Barrett, can you use your mic?
Sorry, is that the best view you can show us of it?
I thought you showed one a moment ago, which showed the side view.
The side view shows the bungalow, but the garage is further to the rear, so to the west. But it's only shown on the roof form.
And how old is the garage?
I'm not sure on that one.
I'm sorry, Mr. Delvin, do you know how old the garage is that's been built?
I don't, Chairman. Not. It's modern. It's the last few years. Yeah.
Councillor Davis, you were next.
Yeah, thanks. Ben, you've adequately given explanations why you think it's wrong to refuse on two of the three reasons, number 2 and number 3. But how would you argue against the officer's recommendation, the first one, where it says it would be a cramped and contrived form of development and is contrary to a number of policies?
I think again, if you could show that aerial image that had the garage on, please, if that's possible. It might be 20. I think as you can see, members, you've got the historic building to the right-hand side of the white square. You've got a more modern bungalow just to the south of the white square with a modern garage to the west of that, and our plot is the area to the north of that garage. It's in essence a squaring off of the development. It's already a sort of a compact little area development, and that separate piece of land is actually enclosed by walls. It is and hedging. It's a walled garden in essence along the back, separate from the original curtilage of the property. So from our point of view, we don't consider it's particularly cramped. And the officer also mentioned there are no other buildings on the site. That's not correct. There's actually a garage and stable building associated with number 40, which you can just make out to the sort of halfway along the northern boundary of the white square there. So that information wasn't actually correct. There are outbuildings.
I think, members, it's important that we're aware that there are buildings there. I think it's been outlined. And we perhaps should have had some clearer photographs showing those, because I looked at it the other night when I went to the leisure centre, and I thought there was more dwellings around it. But anyway, any other questions, members? Councillor Busby.
You would agree that two wrongs don't make a right. The initial wrong was building that other bungalow and the garage that detracts from the building. Because we've done that doesn't mean that we should go ahead and exacerbate the situation, surely.
I didn't say the other one was wrong. I'm just pointing out that there is development in the curtilage of that building already, and I don't think this therefore gives rise to harm. The decision previously taken was probably that it wasn't harmful to the listed building, otherwise it wouldn't be there. Two wrongs don't make a right, I absolutely agree, but I don't think this is wrong.
I will leave you to work that answer out, Councillor Busby. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Thank you. Is there anything you wish to comment on what you've just heard?
I think with the cramped and contrived form of development, if you, I'm not sure if we can get the slides back up, where you look at the proposed dwelling within the proposed curtilage, it does end up sitting on most of what's available, and therefore the amenity space, whilst the bungalow would be only 2 beds and would be small in size, so you wouldn't expect a large amount of garden curtilage for that property. It would eat up most of it, particularly when you have the car parking as well on the site, and it would be very limited, which is how I reached the conclusion that it created a more cramped and contrived appearance. I think in terms of obviously the heritage, it's probably best that Geoff comes along and obviously explains the setting and why Hadleigh swimming pool is obviously a different situation to this proposed dwelling.
Thank you. Yes, I'll go to Dr. Duck next, but I think it is also worth noting that people who downsize and they want bungalows and small bungalows don't necessarily want large gardens. So, you know, it balances itself up. It can work either way. Dr. Duck, would you like to comment on what you've heard?
Thank you, Chair. I think we look at this, we look at the overview of the facts we have before us. The building is listed. Government listed it to protect it. What's gone before has gone before, whether it's got consent, whether it was given a consented appeal, whether Heritage were involved or not relevant to this case. Outbuildings in the grounds of the building, I don't know what age they are. They may have been there when it was listed. They may have planning permission to be erected afterwards. I don't know. Nevertheless, this is a bungalow in the grounds of a Grade 2 listed building. Catherine showed you the old OS map, I think the first edition, 1880s. And on the north-east side of George Street, all the houses are very, very close together. They're touching, obviously, there are terraces and there are infills, and they're very attractive, but they are of a lower status than this 17th century timber frame. And the lower status is illustrative, or is illustrated by the size of the gardens as much as the extent of the frontage. They are smaller buildings. Some of them are actually, or most of them are actually lower. They're 1.5 storey and 1 storey in that row. On this side of the road, on the south and east side, number 40 is a large, earlier timber frame, very significant building. Also, it's interesting to note the size of their garden in respect of the size of the building. It's a much bigger garden relating to a much bigger house because it's a much higher status. Now, a lot of the buildings opposite are very attractive but aren't listed by the government, except the ones to the north and east. A lot of those buildings are non-designated assets, but they have small gardens. Number 40 and 42 has a very big garden, and it's interesting on several issues. The agent says the building, the site where the house is being built, was never in the ownership of the house, apparently built in 1663. I wasn't there in the 17th century. I don't know who owned it. But it's quite diagnostic for me, looking at the size of the land that surrounds it. It's all open land. It's not been built on. That tells me that through the history, I mean, I wasn't there, but through history, and in my experience, open land like that around a building suggests that they owned that land, and they kept it for their own orchards, their own animals, their own agriculture. It turns out now it's a park. They may have given it, I don't know. Nevertheless, it's not been developed on. So it stands alone. It's a very significant building. I hear what the agent says about the bungalow built in perhaps the 60s. The building was listed in 1950. A bungalow came along in the 1960s. Heritage and the legislation and the guidance have all tightened up dramatically since the 60s, obviously. We're now in the 21st century. We don't let things go that Heritage think are harmful. We'll object to them, or we'll say they're harmful. The issue with the swimming pool is obviously a different issue. The town council said, oh, well, they've got they designate a low level of harm to it. Well, we take each on its merits. We have no interest other than protection of the environment, the conservation area in this case, and the setting of listed buildings. So 40, the development of a house, a bungalow, in a back garden of a significant listed building is seriously harmful. Now, if I could just take you through a couple of quick things. Catherine raised the issues about chapter 16 of the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework. I would just like to reiterate, chapter 1, paragraph 194 says any harm to or loss of significance of a designated asset, any harm requires clear and convincing justification. Well, I've not heard any of that yet. Our own policy, CN06, which we rely on quite a bit, it's a very useful policy. It says proposals that involve new development within a setting of listed buildings or within the curtilage or setting must be of an appropriate scale, form, siting and detailed design to harmonise with the existing building and its setting. Now, as I say, that building is a major 17th century building, perhaps arguably the most significant house in George Street, individual house, even though it's now 2. It says it must retain a curtilage and or setting which is appropriate to the listed building and the relationship with its surroundings. By sticking a house in the back garden of a Grade 2 house, we are not retaining an appropriate setting or curtilage. And then finally, Chair, the Setting of Heritage Assets Guidance from Historic England, 2nd edition, it lists a checklist of 27 points which are potential attributes of a development which will affect the setting or could affect the setting of a building. And the first one of those 27 is proximity to the asset. This is that far away, almost. So of that list of 27 potential attributes, proximity is the one Historic England put at the top of that list. And so for all these reasons, the Heritage team found a low to moderate level of harm, less than substantial, which is, as I've said previously, 95% of all harm to listed buildings in character of conservation area is less than substantial. Substantial harm is only retained for, say, the demolition of a listed building, something of that sort of magnitude. Everything else is on a spectrum of less than substantial, as Catherine's illustrated. So for those reasons, the Heritage team do not support the scheme.
Thank you. I'm just a little confused because you said that it was built in the garden, or the new dwelling would be built nearest to the heritage building, but you also said that there was a new garage nearby. Surely it's nearer the new garage that's built in the other garden.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, I'm not aware of the age of that garage. It is quite new.
That's neither here nor there. There's a garage that's nearer to it. That was the point. Than
yes,
nearer to the house.
Quite probably.
That's what
yeah,
I was trying to get my head
But
around.
my concern is how close it is to the listed building.
Can you help on that? 'Cause
Thank you, Chair. We don't have the planning history of the garage in front of us. It's possible that it's in the garden of a non-listed building and it was PD. We don't know. I don't think we should hang our hopes on that being a bellwether for the proposal here today.
well, we may not hang our hopes on it, but there is a garage there, so you just need to be aware of that. Right. Members, we've still got one more public speaker, and that is the local ward member, Councillor Mick Fraser. Councillor Catherine Grandin, I haven't heard from. Councillor Fraser, you have 5 minutes in which to address the committee, and I'll see if there's any questions at the end of it for you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just like to point out, actually, I've been approached by both the applicant and Mr. Marinu from number 42, so I've got to bring out points from both. And I'll start off with the applicant, Mrs. Quinlan, who I've met with and discussed this application. Incidentally, previously there was previous consent granted for a bungalow on this plot back in 1986, so perhaps that this previous consent actually sets a precedent. Also, Babergh had a previous proposal that we've heard from the Town Council regarding building 4 substantial houses on parkland behind East House. So perhaps there is a precedent there for this proposal to go through. The objections raised from the 2018 refusal have largely been addressed, as stated by Ben Elvin, the agent there. Certainly respect with lowering the height of the bungalow from 1.5 to a single storey. Objections have, raised by the management of the leisure centre, which was part of the refusal last year, have been mostly resolved. And I've spoken with Tracy Loynes, the manager there, to confirm this as well. The applicant has negotiated, subject to contract, rights of way across the land owned by the council for access. And as we've heard, there is the town council has not raised any objections and supports this application. There's also support now, or rather no objections from Hadleigh Society, Suffolk Highways and Historic England. If consent is granted, number 40 will retain the historic garden, and there will be parking for a few cars there. So there has been a precedent set, there is support, and issues from the previous application have been addressed. That said, the parking and access does remain an issue. If you could bring up slide 20, there is just something else to the vehicle access will go via the access to the leisure centre, and on numerous occasions there will be service vehicles, sometimes emergency vehicles, parked on that location. So as has been highlighted, it is a buyer beware situation with regards to access with the property for any future owners of that. Some quite clear points on this though. The development would be within a conservation area. It's a very lively habitation for our wild birds actually around there. It's quite delightful all around that park area in the summer months to hear the bird song. So there may be some disruption of that. Of course, it's in the ground of the Grade 2 listed building, and it has been discussed at length that in the terms of the MPPF, this proposal would cause a low to medium level of less than substantial harm. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, have you got any questions? No? Thank you very much. I've got a question for our officers. Can you elaborate on the decision for the erection of a detached bungalow that was granted in 1986, which Councillor Fraser referred to, and I've now found it in the papers, because you know you haven't commented on that at all.
I couldn't find, because it's 86, I couldn't find the plans on the microfiche for it. And I appreciate, obviously, if there has previously been a planning permission on a site, usually going forward that does bear limited weight or some weight. I think because of it being in 86 and then the fact that since then we've had particularly the MPPF with regards to the heritage that have obviously honed in on the fact that any level of harm to a listed building designated heritage asset has to then be outweighed by public benefits. That legislation, I can't comment on what the harm was in 86 or whether heritage were consulted, but it's moved on considerably, and we've got obviously new guidance and new MPPF that we have to follow in terms of the harm to a listed building, which is why this application is being obviously recommended for refusal compared to the 86, which was obviously granted. So that's why there's the difference, and I think the previous outline has very, very limited weight in comparison to what may usually go forward if there's already been a consent granted.
I think Dr. Duck, you wanted to come in, but can you throw any light on this, because it's important that when there's been a permission granted, and that was a long time ago, we need to know why it's different and why we took one view then and we're taking a different view now. I think that's quite important to members.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I wasn't even born, so I don't know. As Catherine said, we couldn't find the records. I certainly wasn't here. It's a long time ago. It's a long time ago. As Catherine said, we have the National Planning Policy Framework, but we also have the Planning Listed Buildings Conservation Areas Act 1990. So 4 years after this development was supported, we have a major act, a white paper that came through, major act, protecting listed buildings and conservation areas, and that's the act that we still use today from 1990. And then since then we've had the splitting off of English Heritage into, English Heritage had only been around 2 years when that was approved. Nevertheless, they've now split off and they are Historic England, English Heritage, and they write these things like this guidance, this isn't a second edition, but the guidance is only 8 or 10 years old. Some of it's much more recent. And as I said initially, things are tightening up all the time. So something from 33 years ago is going to carry very little weight, as Catherine said, at least from a heritage point of view, because guidance and legislation and case law has moved along so much since then.
Thank you. Members? No? So did you say something?
I was only briefly going to agree with what Dr. Duck had said. In the same way that some planning policies become more permissive in the last 30 years, we wouldn't then not allow something because we've refused it 33 years ago. I think the same is true here. Conservation has become more restrictive. We've seen in repeated appeal decisions that inspectors take this very seriously, so it's gone in the way of conservation. We're at least 2 local plans past that date, 2 governments. It was 26 years in PPF, so although it's an interesting part of the narrative of the site, I wouldn't hang too much weight on the fact that there was previously a decision for a bungalow 33 years ago.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I was here in 1986, so I must like to set in on it, but I can't remember that far back. But anyway, members, we're now open for debate. Who'd like to start? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Just want to clarify, Catherine, would you just explain what you mean by contrived in this context? Because I don't really understand that.
It's how it's sat on the plot in comparison to particularly obviously 4042 George Street in their wider area, and the other dwellings within George Street all sit comfortably. They have obviously varying sizes of rear gardens. This ends up being contrived in the sense that it segregates the garden land. It's a small area, and then obviously putting in a new house to fit within a small piece of land, which is why I've reached a conclusion. Obviously, it looked cramped and contrived in terms of the wider area and the appearance of the orientation and the amenity space around it.
Thank you. And yes, please do.
I just want to really, the heritage aspect really is probably the main focus, isn't it? For me, the assessment of moderate to low harm on the heritage sort of scale that's been described. And by the way, they're very good graphics. I thought they were very interactive and really helped us. And I think perhaps if we're going to expect those as per norm in the future, we might not need so many site inspections, perhaps. So really good and you know, probably what we do need in terms of sort of presentation. But back to this. So I really feel perhaps we are overplaying the harm aspect when we seem to be downplaying the benefit. So of course, the harm must be assessed in the same sort of way. You couldn't expect to have a massive benefit because there is only space for one house. But that also means that the scale of the harm is lessened as well. Yes, there's only benefit of one house, but there's only the harm of one house. So I think we've really got to make sure that we are assessing it in a fair terms of potential harm. So, yes, it's just a point I wanted to make. I might well come back with some other comments, but could you comment on that and how you've assessed that?
Okay, so obviously like you said, the public benefits in a site that's small are always going to be smaller because you can't fit as many houses, you can't have 10 houses, which would then have 6 being affordable. The problem is that you could argue, and my point is that that dwelling could go elsewhere in terms of a different plot of land where there is no harm to a listed building, and therefore that's how we reach a conclusion that the public benefit, one dwelling that you can easily put elsewhere. I appreciate obviously it's then not in the applicant's ownership, but it's the fact that the harm actually outweighs the one dwelling there, which could go in another location where there is no harm to begin with.
Thank you.
Can I just say, but on that issue, the benefit might be lessened by being elsewhere, because the benefit of that location is that it's very sustainable. There's good connectivity, as I think I've read in the report, to the centre of the village, and good connectivity with bus services and all the other benefits of being in that location. So you might not get the same benefit if it was in another location.
I can see where you're coming from, but the NPPF is very, very clear that and as soon as there's any harm, and even outside of the heritage, in terms of the social, economic and environmental strands of the sustainability concept in the NPPF, as soon as there's harm attributed to even one of those strands, you then obviously have to outweigh the public benefits. When it's the listed building and the conservation area, it's more sensitive. And the fact that it is in a sustainable location doesn't outweigh the harm to the listed building. That is the main point, that it's the listed building as opposed to the location.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Busby.
Yeah, I think this is it's a matter of balance, isn't it? Harm versus benefit. I don't see it as there being any public benefit. There's a personal benefit for the people who are going to live in the house or the bungalow, but the actual wider public aren't going to get any benefit from it at all. And in terms of it's one house versus another, I mean, we're talking about one modern bungalow versus a unique, listed, historically significant building. There's no comparison between the two. I mean, I think it would be, we have to protect our historic buildings. They are dwindling in number, and we've got to do whatever we can to protect them. And I think building in the garden of one as significant as this would be a terrible mistake. So I can't see any reason to support it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Davis.
Yeah, it sort of follows up from Councillor Busby, but if you take the 3 reasons that the officers have given for refusal, I think we need to support the policies that are in place, and it's been an interesting debate in terms of, is it cramped or is it contrived, in the space that's there. But as has been pointed out, it will take up pretty much that whole plot. And I understand the fact that something was granted in 1986, but we've had now 33 years where that listed building has become even more important in terms of being a listed building. Those policies are there. I do understand the point made about a development as another house that's built and for the reasons, but as has been pointed out, is a personal reason, and long after those people move out or whatever, it'll still be there. The second point about the heritage asset, well, we've had this debate before many times, and I think the problem lies more in the way that the heritage assessment is scaled. It's the way it's actually presented, because you always expect it has to be a high risk or more than medium risk to be, but the way heritage assets do theirs is lessen harm on a less than significant. So it's the way it's scaled. But, you know, in my opinion, I agree with the officers on both 1 and 2 points. The third point, yeah, I understand where it says about buyer beware. But the fact is, you know, a different person might move in and they may not be quite so accepting of the area, the amenities that are around in that other area. So I think the lack of any other proposal, I think I propose that we accept the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davies. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Plum, did you wish to comment?
Thank you, Chair. I would willingly second that on the same lines. I'm more than willing to challenge the Heritage Department when it's an area that I have some expertise in, but this is totally their area of expertise, and I think we need to support them by refusing this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or views? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I've listened with interest to everything that's been said this morning from Councillor Nick Fraser and the objector, the lady objector there. I thought had some very good reasons for her objections. I agree with Councillor Davis and for once with Councillor Busby. But I find it, I've always not been in favour of backland development. I think it's harmed quite a lot of areas, although there haven't probably been a heritage asset within them. And I'm afraid I must support the officer's recommendation here. They've obviously looked very hard and lengthy at their determination of the policies, and I tend to go along with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Osborne. Any other comments? Councillor Busby.
It's a question, a kind of point of order, really. I want a point of order, but a point of interest on this buyers beware. I actually hadn't given it much thought until I've just started to talk about it. And, for instance, houses that have been built next to a golf course, the golf course has been there a lot longer, but they are responsible for stopping the balls going into the new house garden. And they've had to spend a lot of money putting fences up to protect it. In this instance, would the swimming pool have to spend money to protect the access to the house in the future, because it creates an issue, a danger of access? I mean, so there is a buyer's beware, but there's also potential cost on existing operations. I don't know.
Well, our Chief Officer's been waiting to get in, so hopefully he'll be able to answer that one, because I don't know the answer.
I thought you were going to say something about noise nuisance there. I was ready for our noise expert to leap in with some advice if there was a noise, because the answer there would be yes, they would. The owner of that site would have to deal with that if it was a nuisance to the new householder. In terms of the other stuff, I think I'll park that with the private dispute.
Yes. Right, members. Unless there's anything new, I intend to put forward the proposed. So I thought you'd done it.
Sorry, Chair, that was the other point. I didn't know you were going to round up. I just wanted to make members, just to remind members of the key paragraphs of the MPPF about heritage assets, because it is easy to run away with an idea that less than means something trivial. It doesn't. So paragraph 193
what page?
Of the MPPF, which is page 55 of the MPPF, says that when considering the impact of a proposed development on the significance of a designated heritage asset, great weight should be given to the asset's conservation, and it talks then about substantial harm, lesser substantial harm. Okay, we've now gone to 194, and it says any harm, and harm has been identified by our experts, any harm to the loss of or the significance of the designated heritage asset, even from development within its setting, should require clear and convincing justification. And then finally, 196 reminds us that where a development proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to an asset, this should be weighed against the public benefits. So you have to seriously consider what the public benefit is against the identified harm.
Thank you. Right. Unless anybody's got anything new, I intend to put Councillor Davies' proposal to accept the officer's recommendation, which was seconded by Councillor Plum. All those in favour of refusal, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against? 2. That is carried. That is refused. Thank you very much. Right, now which way are we going now?
That one, then that one. Or whatever you choose, something you want.
Mr. Chairman, can we just adjourn for a quick comfort break?
Yes, I'll just try and decide which one. Can I just ask members of the public, is everybody present here for the Sproughton one? Is there anybody? No. So the Sudbury one, lots of people here for that. Right, well, we'll take that when you come back. We'll have be back by 11 o'clock, please. Members, I'm very sorry. I've lost the solicitor and I've lost the chief officer here, and I don't know why. I tried to find out, but I don't think nobody wants to tell me anything yet. So, thank you. Right. So that you know as much as I do now, John, and my hands are tied. We cannot start until I get the legal advisor back. And can somebody go and chase up these officers?
I'll go to the coffee platform, see if they're there.
Thank you. Welcome back, members. We're all present. Sorry that the delay went a little bit longer than we anticipated, but we're now on page 31, and the application is for Sudbury, 14 Bournemouth Shopping Precinct. Right, the case officer is Linda Bacon, and we do have Chris Cornish here, if you'd like to wave to us. There we are, who's the noise expert for Babergh District Council. Okay, over to you then, Linda, to take us through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This application proposes the change of use of an existing and now vacant shop unit in the Babergh precinct from a retail use to an esports gaming lounge and bar use. The application is referred to committee due to its controversial nature and the fact that the council owns the shopping precinct and that the applicant is related to an elected member and a district councillor is an objecting neighbour. The site is shown here hatched red. It's located at the southern end of the precinct, which is this group of buildings here. The bus station is to the south. That's the church there. This shows the historic core of the town centre and identifies the site in relation to the conservation area and numerous listed buildings. This aerial image gives context to the site and identifies the precinct here. The precinct, bus station and green open space to the south is the Hamilton Road quarter, which is the subject of a long-standing proposed mixed-use redevelopment allocated by the local plan. This is a submitted location plan. The site can be accessed from within the precinct at this point and from the rear from Great Eastern Road. This is the existing floor plan for the former retail unit. Main entrance here, rear entrance onto Great Eastern Road here. The application proposes an esports gaming lounge. Esports gaming involves video games and competitions on an individual or multiplayer basis using gaming computers and consoles over the internet. The proposal also includes the live streaming of gaming events, a licensed bar serving hot and cold drinks and alcohol, the playing of recorded background music. The use will employ 3 full-time members and 14 part-time members of staff, and the proposed hours of opening are from 9 in the morning through till 3:30 the following morning and until 6 in the morning on bank holidays. A premises licence has also been granted for this proposal. The proposed floor plan here shows the layout with the bar and seating area in the lighter coloured shaded area at the top of the picture, and the gaming stations and seating for the large screen is in the darker shaded area. The main entrance from the precinct side is here with reception adjacent, and there's a second entrance at the rear onto Great Eastern Road. Turning to photos, this is the existing glazed entrance from within the precinct. This is the general view of the precinct looking towards King's House at the far end. The precinct is partly open to the elements above. This is the left side of the precinct and shows an existing vacant premises. This is the right-hand side of the precinct, again including another vacant premises. This is a view looking south towards the application site. You can see the glazed entrance masked out in white on that building. This is a view to the rear taken from Great Eastern Road. The rear entrance is visible, approximately here, as is the 3 single-storey flats in the darker brickwork located above. This is a view looking towards the southern end of the precinct, taken from the bus station to the south. The side wall of the application site is just visible beyond the red brick building here. Currently, the precinct is locked at 8 p.m, and that's to prevent public access into the precinct area. This is one of the gated entrances to the precinct. The staircase just beyond the gated area leads to residential flats above, and this is a view of those flats above. The building at the far end is, this one, is directly above the application site and contains 3 residential flats. This is a view across to the other side of the precinct where flats are also accommodated. Likewise, this is the rear of King's House, which is also home to 12 flats. This is a close-up view of the 2 of the 3 flats that's directly above the application site. So turning to the main issues as detailed in the report are the principle of the development, which is acceptable as this type of use proposed is appropriate in a town centre location and is supported by the development plan. However, the specific details of just how the use will operate requires careful assessment, given the proposed entertainment use is situated amongst and below residential property, and that the proposed use is intended to open until 3:30 a.m. every night and until 6 a.m. on every bank holiday. In this regard, Babergh District Council as landowner has commissioned a noise impact assessment on behalf of the applicant. That assessment concludes that subject to suitable and verified soundproofing works, the installation of a correct sound system specification with system controls, and together with restricting customer access through the precinct after 11 at night, and the proper implementation of a noise management policy and a dispersal policy, the proposed use will not adversely affect the residential amenity of its neighbours. Environmental protection colleagues have reviewed the noise impact assessment and, subject to full compliance with all of the conditions listed on page 47 of your report, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a point I'd just like you to clarify for me. Slide 14, 17. Could you clarify the 3 flats that are above this premises, which I think used to be called Finley Bobs? Do they go the whole of the length of the building, or are they to the back of the building, or one end?
14.
14 and 17, I made a note, slide.
So whilst we're waiting, these flats, there are 3 flats.
Cover the whole
Cover the
ground
whole
floor.
of the ground floor.
That's what I need to know. Thank you. Right. Right, members, we have no town council. I think they've got their comments in the report. Objector we don't have. Supporter we don't have. David Dabbs, you are the agent?
Yes.
Council, yeah. Right. Okay, so
Applicant's representative.
Yeah. There's applicant or agent in front of me, but we'll alter that.
Before I speak, if I could just say, if your officer could just clarify the point, I think it's 50% of the flats occupied because they have balconies and we have offices, so it's only 50%.
Sorry, I can't hear you. You'll need to use the.
The flat area, the residential, is 50% of our space. The rest is covered by balcony or our offices, so it's not entirely 100%. It's about half.
Thank you. That clarifies it, because my memory of that was that it didn't come all the way. Right, thank you. Right, you have 3 minutes, sir, which to address the committee, and that will start when you press your button.
Thank you. The premises has been licensed by the licensing authority with no objection. The police, fire and no residents' objections, so it's been issued by the licensing authority with strict conditions. In relation to planning, there's been none of the 3 flats have objected to this application. The main issue that I see is music as the main objection. But as you saw on your slides, it's only proposed the background music. The report from the expert is in error because it says that a bar, a sports bar, 86 dBA, and the environmental health officer falls into even greater error because he says between 90 and 105 dBA is required, which is actually, that would be required for a nightclub. The licence authority have only licensed it for an e-bar, not a vertical drinking establishment, and the planned layout must be retained, so there's no dancing. It is literally, alcohol is ancillary to the gaming. The gaming is the main feature. There's a completely misunderstanding of the business model. What I would say is that it's the fabric of the building we have to take into account. The way to regulate the music is to turn the volume down. How do we control the music volume? Well, we install a noise limiting device. How do we assess that? Well, we do an assessment report. And normally you can have a condition that says there should be an assessment report. Now, the officer recommends that there should be a validation testing at the end of all these works that he's proposed at great expense. Well, why don't you do a validating test when we just open? And if the volume is, say, only 70 dBA, you set the noise limiter at 70 dBA, and that's it. You don't need to spend all that tens of thousands of pounds to get the building back into use. At the end of the day, we will be in control of what we want to do insofar as if the fabric of the building will only allow 70 dBA without affecting the residents, then that's what we set the noise limiter. If we want to improve the sound, we want to increase it, then we have to do works to the building and spend maybe tens of thousands of pounds to do that, and then we can increase it. But ultimately, we don't believe that's required. Historically, this building has been a supermarket. Lots of noise, lots of activity during the day. Not one resident's ever complained. This building can contain background music without the works that are being suggested. What I would recommend, I'm a licensing expert, a lawyer that deals with licensing, and I've dealt with a nightclub recently, 338. The planning inspector has just said that you have a noise assessment report, a noise limiting device, and the noise limiting device set as per the noise assessment report, i.e. the validation process which the officer has asked for after the work is done. Well, why can't you do it before? You don't need to spend all that money if the volume is set at the right level. It's just turning it down. In relation to people noise, we will manage that.
Thank you, Mr. Dove. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see if there's any questions for you. Councillor Owen.
Hello. There's a few points I'd like to make, really, because...
At this point, it's questions to the speaker. If you've got a question that you want an answer to, the points, I think, is more for debate.
Right,
but,
okay.
By all means, if you can put it into a question, you can ask him for his views or comments.
With the opening hours, at the moment, the precinct shuts at 8 o'clock. How long is the precinct going to be open till? For the... because at the moment it shuts at 8. I want to know how long it's open till if this goes ahead.
The local authority, which is the landlord, has said that the precinct, there's no restriction on planning control regarding the access. It's just they choose...
Sorry to interrupt. I'll let you come back. Can you turn your mic off so you can... Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Sure.
Off.
Mr. Dance. Do it? Yes. Sorry. As I understand, my instructions are that the landlord has said there's no control or restriction on the precinct being opened. It's just normally the fish and chip shop would just close the gates because there's no other use. But obviously, if someone's open, wants to be open, like the fish and chip shop or us or anyone else, then obviously the landlord will allow the gate to be open. It's just making sure that we can close it and we can manage it so that it can be controlled. So, and we've discussed this through the licensing, and that we will manage the outside area and we will close the gate when it's required. You can see that there are a number of void premises within that building. We're putting a use back in, which is modern, that will be managed. It is not a bar insofar as you can see from your officer's report. It's sui generis. It's a gaming centre where the people are concentrating on gaming.
I think you've answered it. Thank you. You've got another question?
Yeah, what it is if there's antisocial behaviour after, because it's only open until 8 o'clock at the moment, okay? So if there's antisocial behaviour sort of in the early hours of the morning, if that's when it's going to be open, who is going to deal with that antisocial behaviour?
If you're talking about antisocial behaviour are you talking of patrons or public in the...
It's public because if the worry isn't the people in the place itself, the worry is the nightclubs and people coming through that area.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. No, I think that is separate to this. If people are about there, walking about, that's a police matter if there's anti-social behaviour. I don't think you can blame these people for something that may be happening outside their premises.
But I can answer that, Mr. Chairman, if you allow me. What we've said is that we'll close the main gates, and it will be the gates up near the where the bus area is that we will use. Yeah. Yes. So we will manage that area to make sure it's only our patrons. If anyone else is coming in, we will ask them to leave. So there's no thoroughfare.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I got your point there. Yeah. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's two questions really. One of you've partly answered, but does that mean you're going to have a gate man on that area where that area is for you to get into? Because I can't, it's always been a secure area. We have got quite a lot of antisocial behaviour going on in Sudbury, and those are the areas that they tend to go for after hours.
Yes, the licensing authority consider this too, and there are conditions been agreed on that alcohol licence, premises licence, which means that it will be stewarded outside and be managed.
The other question is, in my time of work, when I looked at sound levels, it was to do with mostly engines, but as far as I'm aware, there was a limit of 85 dBA for 3 metres. So how are you going to actually say that that area above, where people are going to be sleeping at that time of the day, is not going to be affected? Because, doors opening, things like that, it's all a problem for them.
Well, the answer to that, in the report, you'll see that the World Health Organization set it as 30 dBA for sleeping in habitable rooms. So that obviously the noise transmission from downstairs to upstairs should be that after 2300 hours. It's 35 during the day. In relation to volume, I've said the easiest solution to that is you turn down the music. And what you do is you set the music based on a noise assessment. That means that the nearest sensitive receptor, the residents upstairs, the music is set at a level that does not disturb them. This is a normal thing with licensed premises. You have a noise assessment report, like suggested by the officer. He says that it should be a validation test. But you have a noise assessment report that tells you what volumes you can play, so you play them. Someone's in the nearest sensitive receptor or outside immediately. Check the transmission. Set the level, they may be 60, 50, it might be 0. It might be that it can't be played. But in essence, what you do is you set a level and then you set the limiting device. That's it. And so that the fabric of the building will demonstrate what the volume will be, and we'll just turn it down to make sure the residents are not disturbed. So we'll have to play it at the level fixed through the noise assessment report and the validating test.
Thank you.
Just a further question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. How many people are you expecting to go into that gaming area during the days that you're open?
Well, it will depend on what competitions there are going around them, because obviously they link up through the computer. But we would say that certainly during the night time, we would anticipate no more than 20 or 30 people in the building. I mean, it's not a pub. And I don't know if you know, and if you've got anyone that games, try to move your children off of gaming machines. They're on the machine, they're there to play in the gaming. They're not there to be drinking at a bar, they're there for gaming. So this is not a late night bar.
Thank you.
The reason for asking that, Mr. Chairman, is that obviously you won't be able to put a limiter on the noise that people make within an area like that.
I don't think anyone is suggesting that with inside the people noise will transmit. It's the music noise and the frequencies and bass. The building is in effect as a commercial building to be designed to have retail use, and then the residential was built afterwards, and that's built to a building code. So the idea of transition of voice, no one is suggesting that is, because you can't limit that, even if you couldn't limit that by putting noise limiter in. People noise is not the issue here. The issue is music noise.
Thank you. And I think the other part of your question that you asked, Councillor Osborne, was the doorway. I believe there's going to be a lobby, isn't there, which will help stop this sound coming out of the building. Is that correct at the front?
If you say that a lobby is required, then you will condition it with the works. But what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, is that I don't believe a lobby is required because it's background music. And if we set the music to the level that we want, which is background, and that doesn't break out and cause any nuisance, then that's the level you set. So it's the noise assessment report. So what's happened is there's an assumption made by Environmental Health and the expert that this will be a busy sports bar and will require music of 86 dBA. And we're saying, no, that's not correct. It's much lower than that. And
Thank you. I'm going to stop you there.
If I could just finish this point, if I may, that
Very quick.
The doubling of sound is around about 10 dBA. So 76, to go to 86 is a doubling of sound. It's not just 10% measure.
Members, this is questions to the speaker, but with your permission, if you wanted, I'll bring in the noise expert who might be able to pick up some of these points, and you might want to continue your questioning of the speaker. Are you happy to go along with that? Yeah. And are you happy to go along with that? Thank you. I'm going to bring you in then, because lots of things have been said, and I'm sure you'd like to comment.
I think the first thing I'd do is Mr. Dadds has repeatedly dismissed anyone's wild assumptions of noise levels internally that are going to be generated. These aren't wild assumptions. These are based on knowledge of licensed premises by noise experts, not just myself, but the one that was employed by the council to assess the building. They're not wild guesses. They're based on typical uses of licensed premises. Let's get away from the idea of bars and e-bars. It's a licensed premises. So if Mr. Dadds doesn't think 86 dB is the level they want to go to, could you tell me what level you would like to go to, please?
Can you just give us a quick answer to that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. It will be set at the level that does not disturb the neighbours upstairs, and whatever that will be, if that's 30, 40, 50, that will be the level set, because the objective to us is that the music must not, at the nearest sensory receptor, cause a public nuisance or a nuisance. So therefore, we will set it at the level that the fabric of the building allows, and we believe that that will be background and will allow us without doing all that work. It's common sense, turning down the volume. I'm not saying it's a wild guess. I'm just saying it's an error. I'm saying this is not a busy sports bar.
Your point's made, but carry on.
I think this is the concern, really. There's no real thought gone into what the typical volumes they believe they're going to commit is. It's 30, 40. I mean, most living rooms with a family of 4 in will be at 50, just sitting there having a chat in front of the TV with your TV dinners. So I don't accept this low level. You can't reduce it to as low of anything. Studies and my experience of going into bars over the last 20 years as an enforcement officer, a background with just people chatting with no music can reach mid to high 70 dBs. Just people chatting, having a good time in a bar, not being unruly or over aggressive and shouting. This is people chatting in bars and restaurants. So, regards to background music, typically a bar with background music will be sitting at between 70 and 80 decibels with quiet background music. And you don't need a licence for that. You can have an alcohol licence without regulated entertainment after 11 o'clock at night, but the applicant chose to pursue that until 6 o'clock in the morning as non-standard times. So the applicant is wanting the ability, should they need to in the future, ancillary to their primary business, to have more than just background music. 86 decibels is actually a quiet regulated entertainment. So, albeit, yes, primary business is an E-bar, but the licence allows them to have regulated entertainment. If they wanted to have music at the level of a disco, they could. There's nothing stopping them in their licence doing that, and we need to make sure the building's capable of that. Now, typically, somewhere that has a bar, a DJ in the corner, a bar in the corner, like anywhere in town, like Weaver's Tap, for example, will be playing music at around about 90 to 95 decibels. That's not a loud disco. Mr. Dad said that's a nightclub. No, nightclub's more like 105 decibels. Now, when Mr. Dad is quite correct that there is, it's not physically correct that a doubling of sound is 10 decibels. That's perceptive human understanding of how we process noise. So if I asked yourselves to turn your stereo up by double, the average person would roughly increase it by 10 decibels as measured by a noise meter. So there is a significant difference between, and it's a logarithmic scale, should I add, decibels. So an actual physical real doubling of sound is 3 decibels by sound pressure. So we're talking about high levels. The higher you go, the higher that impact is. So the doubling of that sound pressure, that's why we can feel noise in our chest sometimes when you feel bass going on. At 90 dB you probably wouldn't hear it, at 95 you might feel that beat. We've got to make sure in the planning system that that building is capable of containing noise. An expert has been out, looked at it and said it couldn't even contain 86 decibels, which is a quiet bar, a quiet licensed premises. It's not a noisy one, it's a quiet one, which is of concern. It's an old 1960s retail building. In those days, we didn't have licences till 6 in the morning without going to the magistrates to get one. And in them times, they would have forced a protected lobby in. So the applicant is dismissing the expert report and the concerns that were raised 6 months ago by the Environmental Protection team at the time of the original application and the licence application. In the building's ability to contain noise. The expert has suggested conditions, suggested works to the structure as detailed in section 6. The reason for requiring validation is it's entirely required, this is creating a room within a room to isolate the walls from the existing walls so that noise cannot vibrate up the structure itself. And it isn't just the flats above, it can actually go along the concrete slabs above. So it could be ones that are on diagonals, and in worst case, it could go further. Unlikely, but could. We don't know without testing. So the works are to stop that. It's a room within a room. If you don't get that right, and don't isolate those works from the walls, you will get transmission into that structure. To put that in perspective, for houses, they validate 10% of them under NHBC rules for normal residential sound insulation under the building regs. There is an accepted 10% failure rate in that system. So, you know, that's a lot of houses out of every million, isn't it? 100,000 out of every million. It's accepted that they don't meet the standard because of faults in the workmanship and the inherent problems with dealing with that. And that's why it's important we get this right. It's okay saying we'll do it once they're open, once the children upstairs can't sleep and the families upstairs can't get a night's sleep before work. Then we've got issues, then, haven't we? And so is the applicant. He wants to run a successful business. So being stopped doing what he wants to do at low noise levels is going to hinder his business. So it's in no one's interest, in my opinion, to not get this right before that business opens.
I think we all now understand that. So despite all that, you're supporting the recommendation for approval, but with strict conditions.
I am. Can I just touch on people noise as well?
Sorry?
Can I just touch on people noise in the precinct? The noise from people in the precinct?
Yeah, okay. I'm being advised, yes.
With regard to people noise, let's forget acoustic expertise and reports. Picture a group of people having a cigarette, having a quiet conversation about what they're doing, the game they're playing, the sport they're watching, the activity they're doing, 4 metres outside your window at 3 o'clock in the morning. And just ask yourself whether you think that is something you would be quite happy, or would you ask them to move on? Because that's what we're suggesting, and what the applicant suggested at the licensing hearing was they would encourage people to sit on the bench below the windows above, 4 metres from those windows above, to have their cigarettes. Now,
gamers don't want to leave their games, but unfortunately cigarettes are highly addictive and smokers have to get their fix. I don't think any of us would argue against that fact. So, and we're not talking, if alcohol has been consumed, we all know that our voices sometimes get raised and sometimes we might not talk one after the other. We might talk over each other trying to get our point, talking about the game we've just been playing or the competition we've just watched. The consultant done a calculation to try and put it into numbers. So we know from studies, and there's all sorts of stuff about how loud we are. It's about a group of people, a person talking is about 70 dB at 1 metre. And he's done a calculation based on 20 people talking. So half of them people talking at once in dual conversations. And it will be 64 dB. So Mr. Dad's wrongly referenced the World Health Organisation because it applies to general transportation noise and community noise in the current guidance from WHO. It is not an assessment of nuisance in any way, shape or form, and says that in the scope of the document. 30 dB in a bedroom. So the calculation on 10 people talking will be 64 dB outside those windows above, as shown in the picture in the acoustic consultant's report. That will equate to 50 decibels, 20 dB above, so double and double again what the WHO say the average person can sleep through. That's without the characters of noise. Someone talking is more annoying than just general traffic noise, which is actually what the WHO is referring to.
But thank you for that. Now, I'm going to come to you, sir, and allow you some time to comment on some of those points, but stick purely to those points he's said, because members haven't had the opportunity to put their questions to you yet. And
Mr. Chairman, that's quite right, if I may say so. I'd have advised it. But may I just, I know members of this committee are very well aware of the difference between planning and licensing, and some of you sit on licensing committees anyway. But I deliberately didn't look at it before the meeting, but have any of my colleagues got a copy of the premises licence? Or what I just wanted to note down, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bacon.
I was on the licensing committee. Yeah. Okay, sir. Would you like to go? And then after you've spoken, I'll then ask the members if they've got any questions which they might want to pick up from you two speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In relation to music noise, I'll deal with that first. This idea of children not being able to sleep, that emotional language, I've not used that. What I've said is that we will set the noise by a noise assessment report, and if the noise is that you have to talk quieter, that's what it will be set. If we can talk at this level, then that's what it will be set, so that the residents will not be affected. And therefore, because music is not our primary business, it's background, and we will set it at the level that does not affect. So there's no danger of anyone not being able to sleep. And if there was a danger, then the Environmental Protection Act could prevent it immediately by 1999 by serving the relevant statutory noise abatement notice to cease that immediately. That's not required. In relation to the 86 dBA that was mentioned, a quiet licence bar. No, your report says it was 86 based on a busy sports bar. So that assessment is, I say, is wrong. I'm not being wild in that because I'm saying it's wrong. This is an e-gaming premises, and we are happy to have a noise limiter setting at their level that doesn't affect the residents upstairs because it's background music. And in relation to the what the officer said about DJ, we have to, in effect, he says, do the works to safe-proof, future-proof, in case they want to do, because the licence allows them to be a DJ, a nightclub. Well, you're asking us to spend all that money for something that they're saying that we may want to do in the future. Well, we're not, because you're granting us planning permission only for an e-bar. If it turns into a nightclub, it will require planning permission for that. And in any event, I'm asking you to put a condition on the licence for a noise limiting device that sets the noise limit that we can't change unless approval by the licensing authority, sorry, the planning authority. And very lastly, sir, on the people outside, your officer said 20 people, 64 dBA, and then he said 10 people, 64 dBA. And at the end of the day, you're saying 20 people outside, all outside 4 metres. Well, look, what we say is that we will manage people outside, and there may be only 3 or 4 people. We can limit the people outside, or we can move them to the bus station area. But I believe by stewarding, managing the people outside, and it can be limited to 5. Normally, because I've told you, between 12 and sort of 3, there may be only 20 or 30 people in there. They're not all going to be simultaneously out smoking. We know the population is about 25% smokers. That age group is actually less. So the idea of having all your customers outside simultaneously, as that example given, is wrong. It can be managed by the licence, and it is managed by the conditions of the licence to promote the licensing objective of prevention of public nuisance, crime disorder, protection of children from harm, public safety. All that is protected by the licence, and that's all been rehearsed by the licensing authority. I know there's some overlapping, but I can assure you the music level will just simply be turned down and set at the level that doesn't affect the neighbours upstairs. That's what we're saying. In principle, the use is right. It's all about the volume control, and we're saying we'll have a condition on there for volume control, and we'll set it at a level that doesn't affect the neighbours upstairs. They haven't complained. We will do that. That's responsible. That's a proportionate and appropriate response, rather than kitting it all out just in case this officer thinks it might turn into a nightclub in the future.
Thank you. Right, members, I'm going to come to you now. The questions to the gentleman, okay? I'll take Councillor Davis, followed by Councillor Ayres.
Yeah, I think there is a clear distinction, obviously, between what has already been granted through the licensing committee, and I totally understand that. And as the father of a teenage son, I totally understand the concept of gaming. They get the headphones on, they'll chat to each other, and that's pretty much it. So I accept all that. What concerns me, though, is the caffeine lounge. You know, for coffee, and I'll go away from the licensing thing. I don't understand why you need to be licensed. I can understand people wanting to stay up quite late. But I am concerned about your statement, which seems to be in direct contradiction with what the environmental officer is doing. And if we put planning conditions on here, are you saying that you won't accept those and you're just going to just not do them? Because if we grant this planning permission today with the recommendations, which I think are entirely appropriate, because I think it's easier to deal with things beforehand rather than try to deal with them afterwards, because then it's all about getting all sorts of things. So the question is, will you accept the conditions?
What I was going to say was that I think it's a bit unfair to ask him that, but if you wish to answer it, by all means do, right? Fine.
Mr. Councillor Davies, obviously it's in the scope of your authority to make your decision, and if your decision is that it will be granted subject to those conditions, we can only develop it in accordance with those conditions, so we have to comply. But I think it's only right that we should be able to equally say we think that may be disproportionate, because the way you control it is by turning down the volume. You set the volume at that level. So
you've explained all that, sir, and the bottom line is that you could appeal.
I've answered your question is yes.
Yeah, you could appeal. Councillor Ayres, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your descriptions. That is my ward, and I'm very concerned. I'll just say, as a background, as one of the town pastors...
Councillor Ayres, your question, you'll get the opportunity to say in normal debate.
I'm more concerned about the fact that it's open all the week, and the control of the youths, and if they are there, and again the noise level that you brought up, and about the smoke. You've said here that you can move them, but if you've got children in the bedrooms above in the flat and the people are smoking outside, that does concern me. How do you feel you'd cope with that?
Well, firstly, in relation to the first point, is that clearly on a licensed premises, there'll have to be, after a certain hour, adults, or with an adult, and we will manage our customers. I don't think anyone is suggesting that we won't manage the customers, and the licence protects protection of children from harm, etc. In relation to the smoking, we believe we can manage within the precinct the smoking, but if you don't agree with us, then we will manage them within the bus station area where they're not disturbing residents. we believe that we can manage the smokers in this premises. It's e-gaming, and in fact most people will want to carry on with their gaming. If they are a smoker, that will be relatively quick. There'll be no drinks allowed outside. It will be the smoking, and they'll be going in. There's no gathering outside. We're here. We want people in gaming.
Who's next? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Just wondered if are the people who are going to be using it, are they going to be registered as members, or is it just an open available to all comers?
It can be open to all newcomers or members of the public can come at any time, but we expect it to be more membership led. So people will want to be just in gaming. The idea is that rather than someone being at home in their bedroom or in their gaming, that they can come together and game together. And it's a much more safer, we say, a safe environment. We don't expect general members of the public just popping in and then starting up gaming. I think it will be somewhere where that people will go. No different to maybe snooker, but this is a new type of entertainment for today.
Thank you.
Can I just
yes second
something? So a lot of the concerns about noise are the late hours, really, because obviously that impacts on people's sleeping. And you are intending to open until 3:30 in the morning every night of the week. Is there any consideration of earlier operation time for perhaps Monday to Friday or Sunday to Friday?
Well, the application is as it is, and it's been gone through the licensing. I know there's a separation, but it's akin to a snooker hall. That's all I can do, maybe draw a comparison, is that the numbers are quite small. Alcohol is, you can't be drinking or be drunk and game. Well, we say you can't, and people wanting to play snooker or whether they game, that's their primary purpose. And the numbers are quite low, and the dispersal is it's not simultaneous. You're not chucking everyone out at the same time. It's a gradual dispersal, and we will manage that. And it may be that during the week we are not open to those hours if we've got no customers. But if we've got some customers and we want to stay open, then we may. But the license is there, the license and the planning is there in case we want to.
Cool. Any other? Yeah, go on then.
One more. Do you operate anywhere else in the country, a similar model?
No. There are some examples, but this is a fairly new type of leisure. I mean, it's modern. I mean, I don't do e-gaming. I mean, Councillor Davis talks about his child. My children do the same. That's a form of leisure. That I expect they're doing that rather than going to the pub drinking. It's a different type of entertainment and leisure time. And this type of building is better to come into use for leisure like this than to be vacant.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you. Okay. Councillor Owen.
Would you consider, shutting the precinct doors a bit earlier rather than until the very early hours of the morning? Would that be a consideration? Because I think that is one of the main problems.
Yeah, I think it is something that you can consider. I did give it some thought beforehand. Normally, a restaurant, if there was a restaurant in that precinct, there would be normally a restaurant is to midnight. After that, that would be considered. So I think if you were minded to and saying that we have to exit out to the front, then I would say that wouldn't be unreasonable. We believe we can manage it, but if that is a concern, I think 11 o'clock is too early. And particularly it is a commercial unit. People do, and we haven't had any objections immediately from the neighbours above. And using their bus station exit, we believe we can manage it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've read some of the objections and everything. What about the roller door between the applicant's property and the precinct of the job centre, with the bars? Would that be... Sorry. On page 37... page 37, there's a something says about a roller door between the applicant's property and the precinct and the job centre, which would close off the main part of the precinct and it'd only leave a little bit the area. Would that be something you would think of?
Yes, we are proposing to close that off early. I think that will likely to close when the fish and chip shop closes, so people will only use the back area. If that's correct. Sorry, let me just double check if I may. So I think the one with the fish and chip shop area, we said that we will close off earlier after the fish and chip shop, and we'll leave the other gate or roller area open so we have access. But if you're saying after 2300 hours or midnight that must be closed and we have to use the other door of exit, then that's what we will have to do. But we are saying whichever door we use, we believe we can do it responsibly through the licence. There'll be a gradual dispersal, people will leave, and we don't see that as an issue arising, and nor do your colleagues from licensing.
Thank you. No more questions? Oh, you've got... well, there's still questions to the gentleman. You've got a question, Councillor Osborne?
Yeah, just getting back to that topic of shutting the precinct. Are you going to have the second barrier, which is near where you are, right? Which is where that is. Is that going to be moved up? So you've actually taken that area right out by having it closed from there on.
I don't believe we are proposing that, but if it's a condition which comes onto the application, then it'll be a matter for the landlord whether they will want to put that in or whether they see that as unviable. Because ultimately, all these conditions, if it makes it so unviable, it'll be void, and there won't be any commercial activity in this building. It's a proportionate. The purpose of it is that the dispersal of people after midnight will be gradual, and we believe we can manage that to not create a public nuisance.
Councillor Day.
Yeah, you mentioned in response to one of my colleagues' answer that anybody would be able to come and use the lounge, and that's great. But what steps would you take to prevent people who just want to come and have a drink and they're not actual gamers to come along? You know, when the pubs have shut, they come to your place because it's open. What can you do to prevent that happening? Because I can see it as a two-tier. You've got the genuine gamers coming in and having fun and behaving really responsibly, but then after sort of hours, you mentioned snooker clubs, that's exactly what used to happen there.
Well, in relation to, snooker clubs used to have membership and people would go there for a later drink, historically, when the under 1964 Act, because there were exemptions. But in relation to this, the primary business is gaming. If someone wants to come in only for a drink, that's not the customer we want, and we won't encourage that behaviour. We won't give service. This will be for gaming. It may be someone is a gamer, comes in and wants to socially meet someone there and talk about a game or watch a game, because they're actually watching competitions. So it's driving us. We are not a late night bar, and we have said in the licence there's no vertical drinking. So you can't just come in and just be a vertical drinking establishment. That is not what we're creating. And even though it's asked for a drinking establishment under the A4, your officers said, no, don't do that, use it as too generous for being a e-gaming centre, because we are not, in effect, a drinking establishment from that point of view. And I actually think the A1 use covers it as it is. It's debatable whether actually it will require a planning permission.
Yeah, the question was, what would you do to prevent people that just come to drink?
Refuse service.
Thank you. Right, if there's no other questions, I've just got one final one for you. You did say that the premises being open until the late hours, that, am I right in thinking that if you didn't have the customers in there after a certain while of giving the public the opportunity to come in, or members, you would then close? Because there wouldn't be much point remaining open if it's obvious that you're not going to get any more customers, say on a Tuesday. It might be different on a Saturday.
Exactly. These hours are there in case we want to operate to the hours. Doesn't mean that we will operate to those hours. And I think that the point is that we need that flexibility while we're going through the cost and expense of making these applications, because it is considerable. And there are some competitions that go later on to the evening, but maybe only so many times a year. So it's not going to be, as described, to 3 o'clock every day and every bank holiday to 6. It will be driven by customer, but obviously if we don't have the demand there, we will not be open.
Thank you. Well, unless there's any new questions, I'm going to close.
May I just...
You've got a question?
Mr. Dadds, I used to do licensing law as well as planning law, but I've not done much for the last 2 years, so forgive me. This does have an indirect relevance to the planning decision the committee are making. Am I right? I've looked at the licence. You've got sale of alcohol, late night refreshment, which you obviously need for cups of coffee after between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. And regulated entertainment. So am I right that gaming, playing on gaming machines, is not a... I mean, obviously gambling's not... It's not gambling, I know. On playing video games is not a licensable activity. It's not regulated entertainment, is it?
No, it's not. It would only be a regulated entertainment if, for example, you've got participation in an audience. Yes. Of gaming or competition. So, but from the licensing perspective, I believe that it's really the licensable activity is the alcohol and the hot food and hot drinks between 11 and 5 a.m.
So, and like what? So when you have people in a pub watching football or rugby on TV, that's not licensable. But showing films is a licensable activity, and that is included. And indoor sports events is included, as presumably for the benefit of the doubt too. And you have got recorded music indoors. So I think you mentioned background music. Background music normally isn't seen as a licensable activity, is it? Is that right?
And what it is because, as demonstrated in our discourse today, what is background? It's better to apply for recorded music. But we have told the licensing authority, and they've agreed on the license, and you've seen here that we will only be doing background music. And how you resolve that, very simply, is you have a noise limiter, your noise officer goes to the flat, he goes in there, you put your music up to the level that you want, hopefully, that can't be heard, that's the level set, done.
Just one or two additional matters. I'm looking at my colleague over there. You made the fair point that councils have statutory nuisance powers to deal with excessive noise, but is it also the case, again, because I haven't done much environmental health law since we were colleagues in East Suffolk years ago, unless the law's changed, if you serve a noise abatement notice on a house, it's either a nuisance or it isn't, but with a business, does the best practical means defence still apply? Yeah, it does, yes.
It does, but if there's a statutory nuisance and you've not taken steps, for example, I'm saying we don't need to do that box within a box, all that cost of putting in effect a seal within that building, because we believe the building as it is will take background music. And if we're wrong on that, then we can't play music, or we can't play it to a volume we would require, and then we'd need to do the works. So rather than doing the works and then realising you didn't need to do all that work and spend all that money, is get the building back into use. As long as the neighbours are not being affected, you set the noise limiter. So I say, coming back to your point, is that if we come along, have a noise assessment report, that says it's only 60 dBA, you set it at that, and then no one's disturbed, there's no nuisance. So I think that's how you protect it by condition. If we didn't have that condition and we created a noise at 60, then you can't say best practical means, because we've not put in the steps that the officer has recommended. But I say how you resolve it is the fabric of the building has not been tested with music in it. It hasn't been tested with the fixtures, furniture and fittings because it's not fitted out. But once it is fitted out, then you do your assessment with music being played, and you can say, well, actually, it can be played at 60 and 70, no problem, without disturbing the neighbours upstairs. That's the level we set, without spending tens and thousands of pounds on works that you don't need to do.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm so sorry, Chairman. I think just one final point, if I may. At the risk of opening up something, but I just feel obliged to point out, following on from what we said about playing video games not being a licensable activity, so there is no suggestion at present that, I know your client may not intend it, there's no suggestion at present of restriction on hours if the permission's granted as recommended, other than those that already exist through the premises licence. And so theoretically there may not be if the licence conditions would prevent your clients from giving people an alcoholic drink or a cup of coffee after certain hours, but there is no, given that, as we've just established, video gaming isn't a licensable activity, there's no, I'm not suggesting your clients have any intentions on that front, but there isn't strictly a restriction on it that would be easily enforceable.
It has I think the answer to that, no, because it does have opening hours to the public, but if it's a non-licensed activity, it's unregulated by that licence. So you'd put conditions on this planning consent to mirror the same hours as the licence.
Because there is some legal doubt. Again, I've left licensing law behind a few years ago, but there was some legal doubt about, I seem to remember Mr. Colvin QC writing about it in journals, about the enforceability of closing times other than that go beyond the actual activity.
Philip and I have, we've had plenty of discussions on this point, because as I'm a licensing expert, the enforceability of non-licensed activity is not enforceable by the licence. However, it is said that if you carry on licensed activity that evening and you don't close in accordance, then those activities happening prior have been unauthorised. So if it, for example, it says you should have window locks locked, if you don't lock the window locks, then even though you have, that's not a licensed activity, locking the window, but you can't have sold the alcohol. So that's how it is. I hope I've explained that well enough, but you need to put the hours on the planning consent to mirror those of the licence, to be sure.
Thank you very much for that, because certainly our legal expert has understood it all. We've tried to follow it. Now, are you happy to accept a question from our
environment? Happy to answer any questions from any party if it helps.
Thank you for your patience. Thank you. Would you like to go?
Yeah, it's just during the licensing committee, a question was asked about would people be able to come in and have a cup of coffee, alcoholic drink, because there is a lounge area, and my understanding was the answer was yes, and I would fully expect that as a successful business operator, secondary to the primary business. We've heard a lot about the primary activity, got no issues with that, but I would suggest most businesses would allow, you've set up your licence, you haven't restricted to members only, to gaming only, drinks only be served with gaming. You've offered no controls to ensure that happens. In fact, I would argue resisted any controls to ensure that that's restricted in that manner. So that's my first question.
Sorry, I think it's just a question you've got to ask him. Yeah. I think I've got to be fair to him as well. Sorry about that. So if you'd like to answer that.
To answer that is that the customer described by Councillor Davis is a different, there are different types of customers. If someone came in during the day and wanted a coffee, that's non-licensable. But if someone came in, we went in together and our children were playing and we wanted to have a beer and sit there, and then that's permissible. Someone coming from the town at 2 o'clock when they've kicked out, coming in wanting to have extra, no. So I mean, we've been clear in our vision on how we want to do the business. As I say, the environmental health objection is in principally about the music transfer and not being a nightclub. We're never going to be a nightclub. The licence under the Licensing Act makes it clear that we can't be. And a noise limiting device that sets it at say 60 or 70 means you can't be a nightclub, because a nightclub you need about 105 dBA.
Thank you. Right, thank you. I'm going to call it to a halt there, unless any member has got a particular question that hasn't been asked that they want to ask. No? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dudds, for sitting through that for an extra long time. That is appreciated. Thank you, and hopefully members have picked up points. Now, we'll go direct to the ward member is Councillor Sue Ayres, who's a member of this planning committee and has obviously chosen to stay a member of the planning committee, so you can take part in this as normal. But I'll go to you first if you'd like to start the debate. Thank you.
I'm just really interested to hear what other members feel. Sorry, yes. But as I say, one of my main concerns is the fact that it will be open all the way through the week, and that we do have a problem with youths, and how, I'm really worried about how they can ascertain that the right age group are going in there, and, everything is being monitored. That really does worry me. But I'd be interested to hear what other members have to say.
Well, you have heard the answers to a lot of those, and you have to decide how much weight you put to those answers, but I think they have been answered for you. Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard an awful lot about noise and background music and all the rest of it, but I think human beings make more noise than anybody else when it comes to nighttime activities. And I think most of us would say that if you've ever been near a pub at chucking out time, most of the noise comes from the people walking down the street rather than anything else. You seem to think that they got to communicate at maximum volume. But I was interested to see on page 47 of the report, paragraph 5, it talks about the entrance doors that are accessed via the Boreham Gate precinct should not be used for access or egress except in an emergency between 2300 hours and 0800 hours the following day. Does this imply that the access to the Boreham Gate precinct itself will be closed at 2300 hours rather than as it is at the moment at 2000 hours, and therefore the potential for antisocial activity within the precinct is limited in that respect?
Yes, you're correct. There's no need for the precinct to be opened beyond 2300 hours, because we would expect all customers to enter and leave via the rear door onto Great Eastern Road.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, that obviously makes it a lot easier, and especially when it comes to smokers, because as the noise expert has said, when you get people gathered together, they tend to talk over each other rather than in sequence, so it tends to raise the level up. So with those conditions in there, I'm a little bit happier with it. I'm not quite sure how commercially viable this is going to be, because one of the problems that we've seen, if you look at the television recently, that the big money competitions are elsewhere in the world as far as gaming is concerned, and they tend to be fairly raucous events as well, so perhaps we don't want them to be happening in Sudbury, but it would be interesting to see just how, one, commercially successful the business is, and two, the impact it does have on the much vaunted nighttime economy of Sudbury, and how that impacts upon the availability of police for the rest of the district.
Well, they will be watching as well as playing, won't they? Anyway, any other comments? Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually quite excited by this business model, which I think there is a demand for it, because we very rarely get people writing to say how much they support an application. So I don't know if they've been encouraged by the applicant or whoever, and they obviously know it's coming in, and it sounds like it's just what they're waiting for. If we can mitigate the noise, then that seems like a good option. We have to recognise we're in a transition from a retail model in our town centres, where the premises are looking very sad, or the empty premises, towards a sort of leisure and nighttime economy. So I'm concerned that we could deny you know, quite law-abiding people who just want to participate in what seems quite an innocent pastime because of the activity of possibly some antisocial behaviour that might happen, but we don't know for sure. So I think it's pretty positive. I am minded to recommend approval, actually. So I'd like to put that forward.
So you're recommending the officers?
I am.
Right. Which of all those conditions? Yeah.
With the conditions.
Yeah.
There was the extra condition about the opening hours.
Yes.
To tie up with the licensing.
Oh, right. Yeah. So you take that on board to tie up with the licensing. Yeah. That's fine. Do I have a seconder for that? All right. Councillor Plum, did you wish to comment now? No, that's fine. Okay, thank you. Yes, I think it's actually, I think you're right. It is exciting, but what concerns me more is the amount of empty shops we've got round Sudbury, and there's 2 or 3 in that area. So this would make, I think, good use of it. They're obviously trying a new venture. Hopefully it will work, and hopefully it will be successful, and that they won't have those problems that we all envisage. But and if they do, there are enforcement notices and acts that we can impose. So you know, I think they're covered. So yes, Councillor Owen.
Yes, I haven't really got no objections with it being there. The only thing that I think we've got to make sure we do as councillors is to make sure that the antisocial behaviour doesn't happen. So the likes of, if they do close at 11, then how much of a guarantee do we get that they'll close them precinct doors at 11? That's what I think we've got to make make sure that is in writing.
It is.
Yeah, but
well, I think you've heard the comments when you put that to the applicant, and that there are conditions governing all that. I don't know what more you want.
Well, no, Peter, I just want to make sure that, you know, when they say that's going to happen, it happens, you know, and not anyone, you know, if it says them gates are shut at 11, that they shut at 11.
Well, I would hope that they're going to be responsible operators, and that they will carry out the conditions as may be granted to them later on this morning. And I would have to take it on trust, like we do with a lot of these things, but we do have powers in the background where we can use enforcement if they're not. And I think they're well aware of this. And if they're not, I think they've got the message from the members here today. You know, any other comments? Councillor Ayres.
Yes, I agree. It's very exciting. I do hope it is successful, and that it will encourage our youngsters to do something other than just go and drink. And I just wish them well. Thank you.
So that's a good point. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I have just one sort of question to ask of Mr. Cornish. As a whole, I'm very much tending to go towards the approval of this, as agreed, you know, with the proposer and seconder. However, I have some concerns about the enforcement. Sudbury, in terms of what enforcement has been carried out, has been very lax over the last few years. I'm also very concerned about the antisocial behaviour stuff that is going on, and it's not just antisocial behaviour, it is drug taking. And that area, if it is not been made specifically shut, apart from the area that they need to have out there, I think it will cause problems. And you only got to ask. I mean, I went to a safety conference in Elmswell on Thursday. The police were there. I had no impression that they gave that they actually could enforce a lot of stuff. So I'd ask Mr. Cornish, if you get the problem without the conditions put on here, how are you going to enforce that? And how long will it take? Because I live in Sudbury, I know what it's like. You mentioned the Weaver's Tap. Weaver's Tap it's been a problem for a few years since it's been going. And people in Girling Street...
Councillor
exactly
Osborne, I'm going to have to intervene. I take your point, and I do agree with you, but we can't blame this application for all the other problems that we may be incurring in Sudbury. But they're certainly there, but they're not responsible for that. I think your point to the officer was, how could he enforce this particular application? And we must keep it to that. There are problems all round Sudbury, and I'd like to see more enforcement taken on that, like you would, but we can't blame this application for that. Can you answer?
Yeah, to answer the question, is we would have to enter a noise investigation. We would be looking at two arms of that. One would be statutory nuisance for noise. One would be not adhering to the aims of the licence or licence conditions themselves. To be brutally honest, we haven't got an out-of-hours service. It would take in the region of 2 to 3 months to gather the evidence and serve notice and allow a notice to period to play out. We would have to give reasonable time under a notice, which is governed by case law, to allow works. Now, given the extent of the works that are required, if there is direct sound emissions, for example, then they've got to strip the whole building out, stop the business and refit the whole building. With all the cable work that they're, the state-of-the-art gaming cables have to come out and go back in afterwards to get full isolation. So yeah, it wouldn't be a quick fix. I'd say best case, if we were lucky and everything lined up in a row, we could probably deal with it in 2 months, providing the applicant dealt with the issue as whoever is in that. Remember, we're dealing with premises here. The applicant is just the first occupier. So whoever's in charge, providing they are very good and deal with the issue quickly, maybe 2 months.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that quickly before I go to Councillor Davis?
Not that on that specific point, but what I was going to say was that obviously I acknowledge what Mr. Cornish is saying, but I would like to have, and I'm not like you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not in favour of lots of conditions on things. However, I would like to have clarification of what conditions are going to go down on this so that we can make sure that the enforcement is there.
Well, I'll get the officer to read a little bit later. Okay. Councillor Davis, you've been patiently waiting.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's been mentioned that the applicant needs to be applauded for bringing this idea forward. I think it's an excellent idea. As an e-games lounge, yeah, absolutely. I do share concerns with some of my colleagues regarding the late hours and the potential for antisocial behaviour, because I can see now, I've lived and worked in inner cities, and I've seen how things can change from 8 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night, and then 11 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock the following morning. Yeah, it's a completely different scene. So I hope everything come to. So I would endorse what Councillor Osborne's trying to do to make sure that we do have the conditions. It was clear from Council he was reluctant to agree with the Environment Officer. I hope that they do put everything in place beforehand, because otherwise we've got a hell of a mess to clear up afterwards. So while I would support it, the conditions need to be in place and strong. And I understand about viability as well, but the conditions I think are important.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to get Mark to just read out or emphasise the points that we need to know and make sure that they're there.
One additional condition would be the barrier and off of that area of. I'd like that in there. The barriers that are going to be for the shut of the area that is not. Yeah. No, it's not there.
It's under a suggestion from the.
Let's just find out what is there, right? And then if you need to add that, I'll see if your proposal seconder will accept it.
I'll give the list of the proposed 7 conditions, and if we can have some clarification about the proposed 8th condition, that would be helpful. So, at the moment, each condition would have two clauses to it. If you go to page 47, they're all about we want the details before you start, and then you've got to do it. So, condition 1, prior to commencement of development, we want details of proposed works to improve the sound insulation performance of windows and main doors. That has to be agreed and has to be in place before the use commences. Condition 2, all sound insulation works to walls, ceilings and support pillars is to be agreed and then implemented. Condition 3, details of the sound system, speakers and speakers locations to be submitted and adhered to. Condition 4, a sound limiter to be installed that will restrict all amplified sounds to, and it says here, 86 decibels, LEAQ. Condition 5, which we've discussed already, is that the main entrance doors onto Boreham Gate shall not be used unless in case of emergency between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m. And in addition to that, smokers will be directed away from the precinct. Condition 6 is the submission of an acoustic validation report. And this shall include tests and results of which confirming that sound insulation is sufficient for the proposed use. And these details will be submitted to Mr. Cornish and his team for close assessment. Once and if agreed, those matters have to be implemented. And the extra condition 7, it's quite a long condition 6, I'm not going to read it all out, we'll be here all day. Condition 7 relates to opening hours, tying those to to make it clear, the current licence, because if the licence changes, we want to control it by planning, so we say the current licence.
Current licence, okay.
And there was a proposed condition 8 from Councillor, and I just want some clarification on that.
You've got an 8 now, haven't you?
Well, that was the possible proposed one we just spoke of briefly there.
I don't want to be pedantic, and it could be that I'm just not understanding it properly, but gaming lounge to me suggests casino, roulette, blackjack and everything, but should it be e-games, because this is what this is meant to be, isn't it?
We have been referring to it as e-games. So perhaps we can be sure of that, because
in the conditions it says gaming.
Yeah, we don't want that word gaming.
Okay, I think that, yeah, there's been a little bit of a discussion about sorry, and also I must apologise. There seem to be 5 bullet points above those 7 that I've just read out. I'm just going to confirm with the officer whether those differ from the ones I've just read out. Are they in addition to?
Yes.
All of them are in addition to?
Yes, the numbered ones are the environmental health conditions.
Got you. Okay, sorry. Okay, so what I've just read out to you effectively was one massive long condition. But I think for the decision notice, we will break it down into 7 conditions. But above that, you've got what we've called here a sui generis gaming lounge bar. From the discussion we've had, I suspect members would like to change that to e-gaming.
E-gaming.
Just so it's not casino. I think it's probably obvious, but just for future reference, e-gaming lounge bar. We've got the standard commencement of development, which is 3 years. Approved plans and documents. The 4th condition, I suspect we probably don't need, because it's sui generis anyway, so you can't slip for another use. So it's just
so cross that out.
We'll cross out the restrict use.
So we'll just avoid referring to A4 in the decision notice.
Yeah, we'll take A4 out the decision notice as well, just for clarification. And then the next point is implementation of a noise management policy and dispersal policy, which our colleagues there will have to agree to. And then the next bullet point is actually the opening gambit for the stuff below, so that's not actually a condition in itself. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 11 conditions therefore, and a proposed 12 points, I think related to the roller shutter door or something.
Right, would you like to take that point up, Councillor Osborne?
Yes, this obviously, as a consultee, Sudbury Town Council did discuss this application, and their main thing, apart from noise and the antisocial side of it, that antisocial side was connected with the actual area, the main area of the precinct being closed, and only having the back area would be accessible after those hours. So when the precinct was shut at 8 o'clock. Sorry? It will be the shutter or the door area that is down the far end where you go into the bus park.
Where nearest to the bus station?
Yeah.
I know the bus station.
So that needs to be moved up effectively to shut it.
You mean put a new door in?
Yes,
Well, whatever they need to do, but it needs to go further up to actually give you that space as locked, not the gaming area. or the e-gaming area.
I suppose we're going to see whether you're second or... Do you wish to add on this extra condition?
Well, I can almost imagine a situation where the gaming lounge becomes very successful and generates movement of people, more people around, and the fish and chip shop deciding to open in the evenings. So I'm a bit...
I don't think it's necessary.
I'm a bit conflicted, really, but I don't really have a problem with the barrier being adjusted so that it allays people's fears about the sort of incursion into the precinct area late at night. So I'll support what the proposer is saying.
Right, well, sorry?
I'm just going to ask the case officer if she's got any thoughts on that, as she knows the site.
The image here is of the precinct, and from my recollection there's a barrier at the front here, there's gates here, and then there's a roller just inside here. So there are 3 entrances into the precinct, so it's council-owned property, so it's whatever arrangements are in place at the moment to ensure all 3 gates are shut. Would need to be discussed with the council rather than directly with this application, although the roller itself could potentially be moved back at this point somewhere. Exactly, yeah. So control over the gates is possibly beyond the scope of this application.
Yes, that's most likely the freehold,
yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah, it's a...
Well, they are, members, they are in place at the moment. I think we've got a commitment on the one to be closed at the side and encourage people to go out the back. I think we should live with that as it is, personally. But I have to ask you, do you wish to take that proposal that Councillor Osborne's put forward? Amendment, condition?
There seems to be a consensus that we don't need to alter the gates.
Right.
So,
No. Right, thank you. So, members, unless you've got any new points, I intend to put this to you. All those in favour of the officer's recommendations, as you've heard, been read out, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. There's no one against. We got there. Councillor Arfey, we're running a little bit late, but we've got one more plan to do. Oh, sorry. But Stephen's gone up. I think this won't take too long. Right, members. Welcome back, Councillor Busby. We do have a member of the public here for this item. It's on page 13. I just apologise to those people that have sat there patiently waiting for this. We didn't expect the other 2 to take quite as long, but if you settle for it, you can see some of the difficulties we sometimes have. Anyway, page 13, members, and Stephen is taking us through this. Over to you and carry on.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman, and good afternoon, members. I will make this as brief as possible. This is an application before you today because it exceeds the threshold for commercial space under the Protocol for Delegated Powers. It's not considered to be a controversial item. We've received no objections from any consultee. There are 2 neighbour representations, however, that do raise some concerns that these are felt to be addressed. So the application before you is a reserved matters application, so not wanting to teach you to suck eggs, but the planning permission for the principle of this has already been granted. We are now just purely looking at the scale, layout, landscaping and appearance of one of the plots, which has been brought forward by a prospective occupier and operator. So the description is really, as set out in the papers, access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale for a warehouse, class B8, with ancillary office accommodation, associated car parking, van storage, cycle parking, pedestrian access, landscaping and infrastructure. So this is for the Sproughton Enterprise Park that obviously many of the members here will know and will have visited the site previously. If not, I'm sure all of you are fairly familiar with where this is. So this is the old Sugar Beet site that's been taken on by Ipswich Borough Council. Obviously members granted outline permission for the comprehensive regeneration of the entire site. A14 running along here. You've got commercial developments around, but then obviously to note residential dwellings to the south here, beyond the river, and some fairly dense landscaping along this southern boundary. And then some more dwellings from Sproughton. I think that's Gipping Way to the west. It's just a constraints map, shows obviously flood zones to the south, contaminated land, obviously because of the historic past use of the site, but that has been dealt with by conditions on the outline, and there's no issues in that respect. It's just an aerial just showing the site in context. So the application site itself is shown here. Obviously members will recall, and I'll show you some aerial perspective shortly, that they permitted another distribution facility to the west here for LDH Ladoria, which is obviously well underway. I think the shell is up and they're now on internal fit out. And then, yeah, so that's in context. This plan, forgive the flashing, I think Vincent put this slide in for me. This is the development areas plan, which shows that following the outline permission, the site has effectively been broken up into plots, which is where you would expect to see built development coming forward. See, we're now talking about that flashing area here. This blue diagonal lined area here is where the LDH Ladoria site is and was permitted and is being constructed. We also at the moment have another application in for some infrastructure, which will be an attenuation basin and landscaping here, and then the roadways to effectively serve this new development. This is a site plan showing obviously the building here, car parking to the east, or van parking rather, because it's a distribution facility, employee parking to the front, loading bays at the rear. These are sealed docks to minimise sound leakage, and then we've got waiting areas here. There's a plan in a second which will show you some of the circulation routes, but obviously the county council as highway authority have raised no objection. This is then just a zoomed in site plan effectively of the building itself, and some elevations. Obviously a generally unimposing development. Obviously scale is one of the matters that members are here to consider today. Obviously the site-wide outline permission sets a parameter for a maximum height of 28 metres. This building is only 13.35 metres, so relatively unobtrusive, and obviously would now be read in context with the Ladoria building adjacent to the west. Obviously we've got a lot of glazing to the front there as it meets sort of the frontage of the site and the more active areas of the Enterprise Park. And the views from the rear and then side elevations. Though you can just about see there, these are the HGV docking bays. Site sections very much similar to what you've just seen. Obviously it's a generally flat site, and the members that did visit the site previously when we dealt with the outline application will recall that there are differences in levels between this site and then the residential dwellings to the south. obviously separated by the significant landscaping along that southern boundary and the river and its footpath. And some illustrative sections which just really show some of the landscaping at the front of the site there, which I'll come on to in another plan in a second. This just shows that there are 4 points of access for the development. Obviously this is all internal within the enterprise park. These have been considered by the Highway Authority as acceptable. There is a plan in a moment, I believe, which will show the circulation, how that would work, but effectively you've got 4 accesses to ensure that there isn't conflict between employees and delivery vehicles and HGV going in and out of the site. And here is one of those plans. So you can see here where you've got, I think, the blue area here, you've got employees coming in, and then effectively you've got the circulation routes, which then splits vans from HGV. It all looks rather convoluted, but it is logical and coherent in the sense that, as I said previously, it's to minimise any conflict between users. Notwithstanding that that's obviously an operational matter for the applicant themselves. And then in the evening, obviously seeing a drop-off in circulation there. And this is a landscaping plan. Obviously, landscaping is more of a significant matter within the wider site with the outline permission. Obviously, we've got parcels here being developed by Ipswich Borough Council where they are carrying out or intending to carry out the attenuation basin works for suds and landscaping and other areas around the site. There is obviously some plot landscaping here. We've got some landscaping to the front and then around the sides. And then along the rear as well, there is soft landscaping, but also a 3.4 metre high acoustic fence. Obviously, we've just done noise to death, but the Environmental Protection Officer was satisfied that this will effectively mitigate any potential for adverse impacts to those neighbouring residents who are more than 160 metres away to the south. And actually there's another benefit with this fence as well, because it's close bordered acoustic fencing. It will also contain all of the headlights from any of the vehicles coming into the site. So where of one of the 2 representations that we received, there was a concern about light spill from headlights. That's effectively now contained. Likewise with noise. And here are some aerial perspectives. So we can see here, looking across from the west, you've got the Ladoria building, the site here, which has been outlined in red, roughly speaking. Obviously that very dense kind of tree cover there to the south, then the residential properties and more properties there in Sproughton across the A14. And this is a view from the north, so again you can see the Ladoria building there with this site in context, and obviously then the rest of the enterprise park to the east. And obviously important to pick up that there is obviously more commercial development to the north and the east as well of the site. And then from the south, just so you can see another perspective there of the residential properties on Collinson's coming off Hadleigh Way, Hadleigh Road, the river here and the river footpath, and then the site here in the middle. And the site photo effectively looking in to the site where one of the access points would be, looking across to the south there, and obviously again that heavy landscape southern boundary. So members, I think as I said at the start, officers consider to be this a fairly uncontroversial item. It is here purely because of the amount of floor space. The outline planning permission has already set the principle of development, i.e. that this is acceptable, subject to meeting certain parameters, for example, height, floor space, and where the development itself would go. This complies with all of them. So on that basis, members' recommendations for approval subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. We have a public speaker. We don't have a town council objector supporter, but we have the applicant or the agent. Mr. O'Leary, would you like to come forward? Miss, sorry. You have 3 minutes in which to address the committee, and at the end of it, perhaps you'd remain seated or standing, and I'll see if there's any questions for you. Thank you.
Good
Good afternoon, members and Chair. Thank you for your time this morning and this afternoon. I'm not proposing to speak for the full 3 minutes. I believe your officer has outlined everything you need to know about the application. The applicant is keen to contribute to this redevelopment scheme, which has long been an objective of the local authority to redevelop this site. Bring it back into active use and generate a significant number of jobs for the area. So I'm just here to respond to any questions you may have following that description. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hinton.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience in waiting for us to get to this point. Just a quick one, not really a planning matter, but two aspects to it. One, how many are likely to be employed on the site? And two, what does it actually do in terms of distribution?
Just to give a description of the proposed use, this is part of an ongoing logistics operation. It represents the last mile delivery phase. So it's parcel deliveries coming in from larger sort centres that are coming in for that final transfer to the sort of van delivery stage that would go to houses and deliver those parcels. In terms of job generation, we're looking at approximately 500 direct and indirect jobs that would be split between the warehouse operatives and the van drivers. So the principal jobs that would be associated with the site would be the van drivers coming in and delivering those parcels to the local area.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's encouraging, Mr. Chairman, to see jobs being created in the area rather than just moved from somewhere else, which is unfortunately what's happening with Ladoria, which of course is focusing all of their various operations into one spot. So it's actually just moving jobs around rather than creating them. This seems to be creating them. And it's also nice to see that it's not another fast food outlet, which is what Ipswich used to get famous for.
We'll stick to this application, yes. Any other questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. I might have missed it, but were we given hours of operation for the site?
We haven't set the hours of operation because those were kind of part of the outline parameters. The operation would principally be for HGVs would be coming in during evening hours to deliver the parcels, and then van drivers would be picking those vans where you've got vans coming in and out all day. It's sort of one outgoing contingent and then coming in once they've finished their deliveries, so daytime hours.
Councillor Barrett, I've got the officer who can help that one.
Yes, I only really to underline what the applicant's agent has said, that this is a 24-hour operation effectively in terms of how it works, which is not unexpected for its type, and also bearing in mind the context of that wider enterprise park. The Environmental Protection Officer has suggested conditions in respect of noise, which include, for example, management strategies for minimising reversing beepers, things like that, and then also the acoustic fence, which perhaps unlike the previous applicant, this applicant is more than happy to take on board and wants to ensure that they're a good neighbour to surrounding development. Just picking up on the jobs point as well, and something else there is that the applicant is very keen to work closely with our economic development team and has agreed that we will impose a condition requiring a strategy for local procurement and also upskilling of jobs as well. So effectively an employment and skills strategy plan, which I think is really quite positive.
Thank you. I think that I'll just remind you, you'll stick to this application. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Barrett.
And would it be too far to go to ask whether they are contracted hours or casual or a mixture?
I believe it's a mixture of skills, but I think mainly skilled operation. I mean, the van driving it's drivers, so it's open to all sort of walks of life. But there would be a variety of jobs available.
I'm not talking about skill. I'm talking about whether they've got security of employment or not.
Is this really a planning point? I'm sure you could put your name down if you're really concerned, Councillor Barrett. Any other questions? No? Yes, you've got one, go on then.
Sorry, has any thought been given to the well-being of the employee who's working in this environment, which is windowless as far as I can see?
I believe there is fenestration with the offices, the office part of it. There is a whole programme of employee welfares and benefits and in terms of taking care of staff. That's all part of the company's wider operation.
Thank you. I'm going to move on. So if there's any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, we'll now come to the ward members, Councillor Hadleigh and Councillor Norman. Neither of them are present. So members, over to you. All right, John. Sorry, Councillor Hinton.
I'm quite prepared, Mr. Chairman, to recommend the officers' approval of the outlined matters.
Do I have a second to Councillor David?
Yep, nothing to add.
No? Right, all those in... I thought you said no, Councillor Busby, but I mistaken. Do you wish to
I
comment?
just want to inquire this upskilling of these van drivers. What, are they becoming Formula One drivers or something? Is that what they're...
No, I'm not going to allow that one. Thank you. It's been proposed and seconded that we accept the officer's recommendation. All those in favour, please show. No. Anyone against? Come on. Yes, one. So that's carried. Thank you very much. Well, members have actually got to the end of the agenda. The next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday the 20th of November, and at this moment it's still on. Okay? Thank you very much. But I think we've got Elizabeth coming to talk to us on a briefing.
Yeah, if we turn on the system off first.
The meeting closed. Thank you very much.
Who was the councillor who asked about the Kersey application?